Chapter 12:21. He was not in a hurry to dig out the Earth Spirit Clan's experts buried at the bottom of the mountain. He would wait for them to dig themselves out. When they were exhausted, he could capture them and bring them back as samples. One could never have too many samples. The celebration banquet would be held 10 days later, and the Earth Spirit Clan would need at least a few months to leave the 100,000 mountain range. Moreover, they had changed their route, so they might spend more time. That was because there was nothing to eat on the way here. Everything that could be eaten had been eaten by them. Even with the ferocious beasts that had just moved over, it would be difficult for them to sustain the remaining 4,000 Earth Spirits. The people who had been monitoring the Earth Spirits had to continue watching them. However, everyone was much more relaxed now. Back then, the Earth Spirit race's army of tens of thousands had brought a similar number of ferocious beasts. Even the weakest among them had the strength of a blessed heaven, and there were close to 100 longevity heaven experts. If it had been the human race in the past, this group of Earth Spirits would have been able to kill all of them. It took a few days to clean up and repair Guangbai City. Since it was already built, there was no need to not make use of it. Only after everyone had recovered from their injuries did they start the celebratory feast. The casualties of the human race were not small. In the end, Black Sky God's 3 slaps killed 10,000 people. However, by paying such a price, he managed to gain a few more years. According to previous calculations, the longest would be 6 years, and the shortest would be 3 years. If the Black Sky God directly sent down some kind of divine decree, the Earth Spirit Clan's army would attack in another 3 years. Furthermore, his strength was several times stronger than it was now. At that time, it was very likely that the Black God would strike again. No matter how much confidence he had in the Empress, Renbachyan didn't think that the Empress would have the strength to contend against the Black God after 3 years. However, Renbachyan wasn't too worried about this. At most, he would just bombard the invading enemy with a rain of nuclear bombs. So what if the Black Sky God descended again? From the previous time, it could be seen that if he wanted to make a move, there were many restrictions. The war between the races wasn't something that could be decided by an expert who was restricted in various ways. After the celebratory feast, Hua, who had just arrived at Enchuan City's largest protectorate, stuck out his tongue at the Empress and said, "I won't be a third wheel and disturb the two of you. Other people only live apart for a few months, but you two have been apart for more than 10 years. Get lost." Renbachyan waved his hand in disdain. "Am I your biological child? Oh, it's a gift from topping up the game. Since you're my father, I won't complain to the queen about you staying at the brothel every night." Honeysuckle made a face and skipped out of the room. "Renbachyan, everyone else has a cotton-padded jacket, but my cotton-padded jacket is full of knives." The Empress looked at Renbachyan and revealed a spurious smile. She didn't really care about Hua's nonsense. Even though Renbachyan often went to brothels, he still behaved himself and never stayed overnight. But that did not prevent her from frightening him a little. Since they were husband and wife, they had to have a little fun with the whip and candles. Fortunately, Renbachyan wasn't easily intimidated. After so many years, an honest person had also become a troublemaker. He got up, walked behind the Empress, hugged her, and rested his chin on her shoulder. It had been a long time since the two of them were together like this. Relax and be at ease. Moreover, it smelled so good. Renbachyan felt a little restless, but he didn't dare to move. The Empress was already at the pinnacle of the longevity heaven level, while he himself was still at the earth will level. He was just one step away from reaching the path to heaven. If he moved, he was afraid that only one of them would survive tonight. That person definitely wouldn't be him. What exactly is that black god? Renbachyan had been pondering this question for a long time. He had also interrogated those Earth spirit race experts for a long time and obtained some information. The black god had never shown its face. It lived in the so-called God realm. This was similar to any religion. It was too lowly for a god to live with a human. However, the black god could attack from an unknown distance. At that time, it even broke a hole in the sky. This made Renbochin somewhat believe it. To be able to do this, it wasn't impossible that the black god didn't live in this world. It definitely isn't a god, the Empress said. Of course not. Renbochin's mouth twitched. Even though it wasn't a god, the black god's strength couldn't be underestimated and could be considered terrifying. Renbochin was just curious about what exactly this black god was. I wonder how the black god compares to the 6 sky lords, Renbochin muttered. The Empress was silent for a moment before saying, in another 3 years, I will definitely be able to take that step. Maybe I can pry a thing or two. Okay, Renbochin replied softly. The gap was still too big, and he couldn't even touch the edge or make a guess. Late at night, the two of them talked in bed for half the night. They didn't share their feelings as they weren't like that. After a moment of intimacy, they talked a lot about the situation in Dayo over the past few years and how it would develop in the next few years. After the battle, the others could relax a little, but the two of them couldn't relax for even a moment. 3 days later, they dug out all the Earth Spirit race experts buried at the bottom of the mountain and returned to Dayo. The Earth Spirit race hadn't left the 60,000 mountains yet, and they weren't in a hurry to rush to the wall between the two worlds. Moreover, many people wanted to go back and take a look. On the plain, Shurgan, Tonglan, and the others looked at Renbochin and wanted to say something. Say it, what's the matter? Renbochin was in a good mood. Your Highness, can we still graduate in this lifetime? Shurgan and the others couldn't help but ask. Although they didn't personally participate in this battle, they watched it from a very close distance, which had a great impact on them. They really wanted to do something and couldn't hold back some of their thoughts. Do you think the Academy will support you for a lifetime? When I feel that you can handle things independently, I will naturally let you preside over some research. Renbochin laughed. Come on, the value we have created for the Academy is already enough to support us for a lifetime. Tell me, when will you be magnanimous? Tonglan pouted. In the past, she worshipped the Empress and learned everything she said and did from her. Now, she still worshipped the Empress, but her expression and demeanor when she spoke were similar to Renbochin's. However, she was much prettier. Renbochin thought about it and felt that these people were almost there, and they could handle things independently. Almost there, I just need to take the postdoctoral exam. As soon as he said this, everyone's face turned green. Listen, is this what a human should say? Can't you be more human? Believe it or not, I'll jump down and die for you. Supang looked sad and indignant. Everyone looked at Renbochin as if they were looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Alright, I was just saying. Go back and divide yourselves into small groups, set a target, and let me review it. If you pass the review, each group will be in charge of one project. If you succeed, I will issue you a graduation certificate. After that, you can stay or leave as you wish. If you don't want to do postdoctoral studies in the Academy, you can enter the Research Institute. Renbochin waved his hand. You can't go back on your words. All of you are already quite grown up, yet you are still so childish. Renbochin sneered. He sighed in his heart. It could be said that he had watched these children grow up. From counting with their fingers and toes, they were now doctoral students. All of them had participated in many projects and could be considered talents even on Earth. Now, the oldest among them was already in his early 30s. Now that the children had grown up, their wings had hardened, and it was time for them to fly. Chapter 12:22. The plane arrived at the capital in the middle of the night. The Empress looked out the window at the city outlined by countless lights and didn't look away for a long time. It's so beautiful. The Empress said after the plane changed directions and couldn't see the most prosperous area. This was the second time she had been back in more than 10 years. Every time she saw the prosperous imperial capital, she would feel a burst of satisfaction. This was her country. She saw many officials waiting for her when she got off the plane. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. The Empress nodded slightly and looked at everyone. Then, she fixed her gaze on the great elder, who was standing with his back straight, and smiled. Not bad. Thanks to Your Majesty and Her Highness, I didn't expect this day to come. The great elder smiled happily. It's your blessing, great elder. This is a joyous occasion, the Empress said with satisfaction. The moment she got off the plane, she realized that the great elder had broken through. The great elder had been seriously injured when he was young, and his body was damaged. In addition, his talent was average, and he and the junior elder had always been the weakest in the imperial court. Now, they were both 100 years old, and the limit of a Kismet Heaven expert was 120 to 140 years old. Based on their physical condition, it was hard to say if they could reach 120 years old. Now that the great elder had broken through to the Cardinal Heaven level, he looked much younger, and he could reach 180 to 200 years old. The junior elder was only one step away from the Cardinal Heaven level, and he had the opportunity to take that step before his death. Apart from the two of them, the others had also improved. If they stayed outside the wall of the two worlds for a few years, they might have the opportunity to break through to the Longevity Heaven level. That night, they rested. The next morning, the Empress and Renbochin sat side by side at the head of the court. Renbochin handled the court affairs, and the Empress only asked a few questions occasionally. After handling the court affairs, everyone was most concerned about the matter, which was the projection of the battlefield. Since the first battle at Jiaotou Stream, everyone had been silent, and the atmosphere in the imperial court was solemn. In the first battle at Jiaotou Stream, the Earth Spirit had completely crushed the Earth Spirit. The difference in strength between the two sides made everyone feel depressed. Everyone in the imperial court was a top expert, but after seeing the Empress dealing with the foreign races, they knew what was going on. With their current strength, it was difficult for them to even participate in such a battle. He was indignant. If they followed the Empress to the outside of the wall of the two worlds, many of them would be able to break through to Longevity Heaven. It wasn't until the Battle of Guangbei City that everyone's expressions relaxed. The continuous cannon fire and the 100-meter-tall wall of fire proved that everything they had done was not in vain. Until the gigantic palm descended from the sky. This is the Black Sky God. Is this really a god? Even though they already knew about the Black Sky God's existence, everyone in the imperial court was still shocked. He could overturn mountains and seas with just his hands. He was not much different from a god. It doesn't matter what this is. All you need to know is that this thing can be killed. Renbochin knocked on the long table in front of him. Although they said that, everyone's expressions were still ugly, and their hearts were heavy. He could kill it, but how? Renbochin's heart was also heavy. This thing was probably even more difficult to deal with than the Sixth Heaven Master. Even if the universe battleship couldn't kill the Sixth Heaven Lord, the Sixth Heaven Lord might not be able to do anything to it. Since this thing could break through space, it was even more troublesome. However, he couldn't say it out loud. How many years can we buy? The great elder asked. 3 to 7 years, maybe even longer, but we don't have to worry about the next battle, Renbochin replied. The Earth Spirit shouldn't cause any trouble in the next battle, but after that, they would probably have to face Stainless City and Heaven Master Stainless. After calming everyone down, the junior elder pondered for a moment and asked, should we mobilize the entire nation? Dayo has a population of 100 million. If we mobilize the entire nation, we will definitely be able to improve our overall strength in the next few years, and many things will be easier to plan. Not for the time being. What limits us is the speed of technological advancement, not productivity. Renbochin shook his head. Then, should we let the people know about the existence of the foreign races? Start spreading the news. I will arrange this. Renbochin was prepared to gradually use the newspapers to reveal the existence of the foreign races. After arranging some matters, there was a banquet in the afternoon. No matter what, it was still a victory. After another morning court session, Renbochin and the Empress went to the laboratory. There were currently 4 laboratories in the capital, and the 2 of them were going to study the foreign races. The unlimited life of the Earth spirit was very suitable for scientific research. There's another batch of experimental subjects. How's the progress? Renbochin and the Empress walked past a few laboratories and casually asked the laboratory supervisor. We have some conjectures, but we need time to verify them. The main problem is that we don't have the symbiotic life of the Earth spirit. According to some of the confessions we have received, they share their life with a special kind of worm embryo. This kind of worm embryo has no other functions, but its strong vitality and rapid healing ability. Like earthworms. Yes, many species have this ability, but very few species have such a strong vitality. This kind of worm embryo can be shared with them after they reach the immortality realm. After that, they leave the worm embryo in the birth valley because it doesn't have any power. As long as the birth valley isn't breached, they won't die easily. Renbochin nodded. This was easy to understand. Not only do they share their life with the worm embryo, but they can also share their life with other creatures with strong vitality. It's said that the success rate is very low. They need to sign a contract with another creature. According to the information we have, this is likely a kind of synchronization behavior, which synchronizes the magnetic field or frequency of 2 life forms. If it fails, its body will collapse. The worm embryo has almost no thoughts and won't resist, so the success rate of this synchronization process is very high. Is the effect of the truth elixir good? Renbochin asked. It sounded like there had been rapid progress recently, and there should be a breakthrough in the truth elixir. Yes, we added a phenothiazine drug and a pseudophysalis plant called Qingsu to the thiopental sodium. After using the aphrodisiac on them, they can forcefully suppress their brain's central nervous system, causing the earth spirit to enter a hallucinatory state. However, it's still very difficult to find information about the Black Sky God. Every time we ask about the Black Sky God or related information, they will enter a state of confusion, and their brains have even exploded a few times. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's very difficult for them to die. I just want to know what I want as soon as possible, Renbochin said. However, we found something very strange. Even if their body turns into minced meat, they can still recover. So during this process, how were their thoughts and memories preserved? Is it through cells, or something else? Did you find anything? Yes, we found that in the process of their death and resurrection, there is an extremely strong existence of electromagnetic waves with a frequency of around 280 Hz. Renbochin stopped in his tracks, turned his head, and looked incredulous. This is radio frequency waves. Yes, the feeling it gives us is like uploading and downloading data. Chapter 12:23. The person in charge of the laboratory also had an incredulous look on his face as he spoke. At the moment of their death, this electromagnetic wave will appear, and it's very strong. After that, we tried to extend the time it takes for them to recover, leaving a blank period in between to confirm this. When they come back to life, the same electromagnetic wave will appear. The former is the outgoing data, while the latter is the incoming data. During this process, their bodies will only have biological instincts. Renbochin took a long time before exhaling and saying, "This is really an amazing discovery." Are there any more discoveries? For example, where are these electromagnetic waves emitted? How far are they from? How do we block them, and can we analyze the information from them? These electromagnetic waves will disappear after being transmitted more than 3 meters away, as if there is an invisible door in the air and the electromagnetic waves have entered it. When Rinpoche heard this, he subconsciously thought of the Black God. This was the same method that the Black God used to suddenly appear out of thin air. At the thought of this, Rinpoche's face turned ugly. He didn't know if the Black God would use this method to locate this place. The Black God was too mysterious, and no one knew what kind of abilities it had. Make arrangements to separate the Earth Spirit's research and transfer it to another laboratory. I will give you 3 days. Understood. Although the person in charge didn't know the details, he still agreed. Rinpoche and the Empress walked around and understood the situation of this laboratory. After leaving, they immediately arranged for a new laboratory. They would use the original Mount Genesis laboratory. This laboratory was in the capital, and it would be too dangerous if the Black God found it. Even if the possibility was very small, Rinpoche didn't want to take this risk. The Empress asked. She didn't understand technology and didn't know what electromagnetic waves and rays meant. Seeing that Rinpoche was so anxious, she had some guesses. It's radio waves, the same as the radio station we use. However, unlike the radio station, I suspect that it uses electromagnetic waves to transmit and receive data. At the moment of their death, their memories and thoughts are transmitted to an unknown place. When their body recovers, they receive their memories and thoughts. You mean the Black God? Don't memories follow the soul? The Empress understood half of it. Rinpoche shook his head slightly and said, there hasn't been much progress in the study of the soul. Besides, they aren't humans, and the appearance of those electromagnetic waves is very strange. Be careful just in case. Bring the Earth Spirit race to Earth and kill one of them to find out, the Water Empress said after thinking for a while. Rinpoche was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. Good idea. Even though the Empress didn't know much about technology, this idea of hers was indeed brilliant. I'll go back today and arrange for a laboratory to be prepared. Also, you should go back to take a look. My parents thought we were divorced. The Empress snorted, glanced at him, and said, if that day really comes, I will bury your head in the 60,000 mountains. In her eyes, there was no divorce, only life and death. After all, it has been 40 years. Rinpoche sighed. More than 10 years had passed since the Empress left for the 60,000 mountains. Even Erhua was about to reach his 16th birthday. 40 years had passed on Earth. He hadn't seen his daughter-in-law for 40 years, so he could imagine what his parents were thinking. If it weren't for the fact that he controlled the winged cavalry and the large number of Earth will experts that he had nurtured over the past few decades, perhaps others would have some ideas. Decades had passed, and there were already a large number of man-will experts on Earth. However, the Earth will experts were still the top experts. Earth will experts were the limit. Now, whether it was Rinpoche or others, everyone understood that Earth couldn't produce spirit will experts because it lacked something. However, there was still the Horned Dragon Galaxy. There's one more thing before we go back. The Empress blinked and smiled meaningfully. What is it? Go to the brothel that you often go to tonight. It's called Lantern Tower, right? The Empress teased. Rinpoche was confused. Are you out of your mind? I was wrong. Go, go. Rinpoche decided to bow down to the big boss. For half the afternoon, he and the Empress stayed together in the palace. He didn't try to signal the imperial guards to inform them. It was useless to signal them because they didn't have the brains to do so. The most important thing was that he sat upright. When the city was brightly lit, Renbachien and the Empress, who had changed into men's clothes, went to Zhangtai Street. They walked to Zhangtai Street. Lantern Tower, is this it? The Empress asked, but she didn't have any intention of asking. As soon as they walked in, someone came to greet them. Oh, it's a distinguished guest. Sir C hasn't been here for a long time. Please come in. The Empress tilted her head and thought for a while. She looked at Renbachien and asked, "Old driver?" Renbachien nodded his head solemnly. The Empress actually guessed it right. The receptionist felt strange. This old guest didn't look like he was here to have fun. Instead, he looked like he was here to be tortured. After entering the main hall, another madam took over and greeted them with an eager face. The Empress had put on makeup previously and didn't know how she managed to make a fake Adam's apple. In addition, she was full of heroic spirit, so the madam didn't notice it. Call that Miss Zhu over. I have been thinking about her for a long time. I want to see her today, the Empress said in a low voice, sounding somewhat neutral. She has been waiting for you for a long time. She will definitely be happy to know that you are here. Just her. Renbachien coughed lightly. Also, send a table of good wine and dishes. On the second floor, the two entered a room. The Empress turned around and opened the window. She could see the corridor outside and the singing and dancing in the hall below. You really know how to enjoy yourself. Although he said that, he wasn't really angry. Instead, he was quite interested in the singing and dancing below. Considering that she had been in the deep mountains and forests or the vanguard for the past 10 years, it was already very bitter. Not long after, a girl of 17 or 18 years of age with delicate features walked in gracefully and bowed to the two of them. Greetings, Mr. C. Greetings, young master. Zhu, pays her respects. The maid outside the door entered the room, put the zither on the zither stand, and then withdrew, leaving Zhu, inside. Zhu, has just learned a new song. Would Mr. C and young master please comment on it? Not long after, the sound of a zither rang out in the room. The Empress sized Renbachien up from head to toe the moment she entered the house. She saw that Renbachien was natural and unrestrained, not the kind of flirtatious behavior that she had previously imagined. Most importantly, even though she spoke to Renbachien enthusiastically and happily, she still maintained a certain distance from him. With a single glance, it was clear that the two of them did not have much of a relationship. Otherwise, they would not have such an attitude. As far as she knew, Renbachien had been here for the past 2 years to look for Miss Zhu. She didn't receive any guests either. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, the unhappiness in his heart had dissipated. This fellow was rather honest. It didn't matter if he was just here to listen to the music. Otherwise, he would be spilled with blood. The Empress felt relieved. As the sound of the zither entered her ears, she felt that this lady's zither playing was indeed not bad. There was no smoke and fire, and listening to it made one feel at ease. It was no wonder that this fellow had been coming here for the past 2 years. He even treated this place as his exclusive property. Outsiders had only heard of Miss Zhu in the Lantern House. It was difficult to even meet her. After 2 songs, the Empress waved her hand, and Renbachien allowed her to leave. That lady smiled sweetly and did not say a word. Her playing is not bad. Let's invite her to the palace tomorrow. After Renbachien left, the Empress played with her wine glass with a faint smile on her face. Forget it. Renbachien waved his hand. Afraid that I'll be stingy. There are so many musicians in the palace. It doesn't matter if she's one more. The Empress sneered. If something really happened between the two of them, they naturally couldn't be kept. Since there was nothing going on, the Empress would not be a villain. It was rare for her to be generous, but this fellow was actually so suspicious. You don't understand. The atmosphere is different. Ren Baqian laughed. The Empress's face immediately turned black. Home flowers don't have the fragrance of wild flowers, right? Listening to music in the palace is not as good as listening to music in the brothel, right? Which flower is more fragrant than your majesty? However, the latter sentence is true. Ren Baqian chuckled. It was just like how many people like to go to internet cafes to play games. Listening to music in the palace was indeed not as good as listening to music in the brothel. The Empress gritted her teeth. In the end, she couldn't control her feet. Set a small goal first. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers. Chapter 12:24. Hua ran out as soon as she came back. Compared to the Empress, she had a stronger sense of identity with Earth. This was her second home. In particular, the delicacies, technology, and various luxuries on Earth were her favorites. The Empress stood in front of the window and looked at the unfamiliar city through the glass. She saw a colorful river of cars in the sky. The current Wuji city was completely different from before. Buildings that were hundreds of meters tall could be seen everywhere in the distance. Starting from the city center, the buildings became taller as they moved outward. Projection advertisements appeared in the gaps between the tall buildings and above the river of cars. How do you feel? Have you ever woken up and realized that you have become a primitive person? Ren Baqian smiled as he sat on the sofa and pressed a button on the coffee table. Messages popped up in the air. The Empress looked away from the distance and turned around. It's a mess. She didn't like the world outside the window. The world is developing, and it won't stay the same. Ren Baqian shook his head. Now, the country had implemented new traffic laws and opened up some air traffic control. For example, the river of cars in the sky was a road in the sky that was 100 meters above the ground. It was said that they were discussing the opening of the second level of the sky passage. There were many changes on Earth, and the Empress could only see the changes on the surface. With the development of society, the ideology of the entire society, as well as other things that could not be seen or touched, were the real changes. Even Ren Baqian often felt that he had fallen behind, let alone the Empress who hadn't been back for decades. These people are really bold. Ren Baqian leaned back on the sofa after reading an email and thought about it. What do you mean by bold? The Empress sensed that there was something wrong with Ren Baqian's words and walked over to sit beside him. Ren Baqian raised his chin. They are in contact with the 8-armed race. There were a total of 2 planets with life in the Horned Dragon Galaxy. One was the 4-leaf grass planet where the Thunder Barbarians lived, and the other was the planet where the 8-armed race lived. Currently, the Thunder Barbarian King was still searching for the Earthlings. The Earth had failed to kill him several times, and both sides were like fire and water with no possibility of reconciliation. Furthermore, the Thunder Barbarians had dug a large number of tunnels under all the cities to prevent nuclear bombs from falling from the sky. Under such circumstances, it was not strange for Earth to come into contact with the octopus race on another planet. The other planet was different from the 4-leaf grass planet. The 4-leaf grass planet had a continent with only wild beasts and no lightning barbarians. That was why humans had built an outpost base there. However, the other planet was different. There were traces of the Ba-Bai race's activities on all the continents. This time, the Earth had learned a lesson from their dealings with the Thunder Barbarians. The first time they came into contact with the king of the octopus race, they had witnessed the strength of the humans, which laid the foundation for the peaceful and friendly bilateral talks between the two sides. Another important point was that the Ba-Bai race had a higher level of civilization, unlike the Thunder Barbarians. Ren Baqian said that they were bold not because of their contact with the 8-armed race, but because a team of envoys from the 8-armed race was on the way to Earth with the spacecraft. A group of rabbits invited wolves to their house as guests. The Empress's description was very accurate. The difference between them was even greater than that between a rabbit and a wolf. "I'm counting on you to support Earth," Renbochin replied. One could imagine what the Ba-Bai race would think when they came to Earth and found that it was full of weak Earthlings that could be killed with one slap. There was simply nothing better than having powerful weapons and the ability to fly in space. They were so weak that they weren't even worth mentioning. It was like a 3-year-old child holding a rare treasure in one hand and a water gun in the other. However, if there were experts on Earth who were similar in strength to the Ba-Bai race, even if they were slightly weaker, with powerful weapons, it would be a different situation. The two sides were likely to reach a bilateral cooperation, trade, exchange, and mutual assistance agreement. It was very likely that they were planning to use the power of the Ba-Bai race to deal with the Thunder Barbarians. Previously, they wanted to use the power of the Empress to deal with the Thunder Barbarians, but were rejected by Renbochin and even flipped the table. This time, the Empress would definitely support Earth by inviting the Ba-Bai race to her house. Fortunately, the Empress wasn't outside the barrier between the two worlds. Otherwise, it would take her more than half a year on Earth to rush over to support Earth. "There's a tiger at home and a pack of wolves outside. Perhaps they are planning to use external forces to deter me." The Empress smiled until her eyes were squinted, and there was a cold glint in her eyes. Then, she waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter." Renbochin nodded slightly. What the Empress said was inevitable. With such a person at home, it was inevitable that some people would have other thoughts. However, this was a small matter, and Renbochin didn't care about their thoughts. In any case, the two of them were firmly tied to the Earth. The news was sent through Renwanyan. He reckoned that it was to let him be mentally prepared and that the official documents would be sent over after some time. Nowadays, planes were faster, and it was easier to apply for air routes. That night, Renbochin brought the Empress and Erhua to his hometown in the northeast. Decades had passed, and this place had changed a lot. However, compared to Wuji City, it was still vaguely the same as it was in the past. Will Grandpa and Grandma be scared when they see Mother Empress? It's been more than 40 years, and you two have been married for even longer. You look just like my sister. It's scary, Honeysuckle mumbled in the car. His eyes kept darting around, making him look like a mischievous spirit. Last time, they even asked me in a roundabout way how long it had been since I last saw Mother Empress. I reckon that they wanted to ask if I had divorced. Then, you told them that you haven't seen her in decades. Renbochin slapped her on the head. Stop slapping, it's going to hurt. Erhua covered her head and smiled until her eyes were squinted. He could vaguely see the Empress's eyebrows, but this mischievous look was unlike anyone else. Then, they were almost in tears. Even after the divorce, they still had to come back to see their child. The Empress's face darkened, and she slapped Erhua on the head as well. You two are a mixed duo. Honeysuckle retreated backward. A slap from a Mother Empress would hurt a lot. Her brain was almost slapped out. In a villa area in the small city, the flying car stopped in front of a small courtyard. After entering the password, the door opened automatically. Grandpa, Grandma. Erhua slipped into the house. You are back. A joyful voice came from inside. There was also a muffled "Aunt." As Renbochin and the Empress entered, the expressions of the people in the house froze. They were indescribably shocked. Dad, Mom. The Empress's voice was squeezed out from the gaps between her teeth, and it carried a gust of cold air. I have already said that she has some matters to attend to. Renbochin chuckled and hung his clothes at the side. The family quickly became lively again. Renbochin's parents were in good spirits as they inquired about their well-being. However, the atmosphere was a little strange. It wasn't because of the Empress. Renbocchen and Erhua were often like this when they came back. Ren Wanyan was already over 70 years old. Even if he took good care of himself, coupled with martial arts and medicine, he still looked to be around 50 years old. Ren Wanyan was also over 40 years old. Even his son, Ren Kai, who called the Empress aunt just now, was almost 20. Renbocchen looked to be around 30 years old, Erhua looked to be 17 or 18, and the Empress, who hadn't been seen for a long time, was still 20. They looked like twin sisters when they sat together. The 70-year-old addressed the 30-year-old as brother, and the 20-year-old as sister-in-law. The 20-year-old addressed the 17-year-old as aunt, the 30-year-old as grandpa, and the 20-year-old as grandma. The Empress's body stiffened when she heard Renbocchen address her as grandma. This table of people sitting together was too messy. Chapter 12:25. Time is like the scouring of water and will inevitably leave traces. The reason why I'm young is that I don't experience the same amount of time as you, not because my lifespan is longer than yours. Just like the Horned Dragon Galaxy, the time here is different from Earth. Give up all this and live in a world without computers or the internet for 100 years, or stay on Earth for 100 years. Perhaps you can consider migrating to the Horned Dragon Galaxy, which is indeed more beneficial for training. Renbocchen sat in a chair with Ren Xia, who was in his 40s, in front of him. At this point, Ren Xia had completely lost his youthfulness. Renbocchen wasn't surprised by Ren Xia's idea. However, the fact was that time was fair to everyone. In fact, Ren Wanyan already knew this, so he didn't mention it. Of course, there were some treasures that could erase the traces of the passage of time, such as the jade embryo used by the Empress. However, with so many aboriginals in the 60,000 mountains, they hadn't found a second one in more than 10 years. As for ordinary life-prolonging drugs, they might not be comparable to the drugs that could delay aging on Earth. Ren Xia heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed after hearing Renbocchen's words. He was under a lot of pressure to ask his uncle about this matter. He didn't doubt Renbocchen's words at all because they were in line with his understanding. Moreover, Renbocchen rarely appeared in front of people and had been like this for the past few decades. It wasn't just him, but also Lu Hua. After changing his posture to make himself more comfortable, Ren Xia thoughtfully asked, "Uncle, when do you think there will be a chance to migrate to the Horned Dragon Galaxy?" There were many things on Earth, and he knew much more than Renbocchen. However, he had to see what Renbocchen had to say about this matter. Let's see the agreement between those people and the eight-armed race. Migrating to the Horned Dragon Galaxy wouldn't be to the planet where the eight-armed race was located, but to the planet where the Thunder Barbarians were located. The eight-armed race probably wouldn't mind expanding their territory to another planet. Renbocchen and the Empress stayed in this small northeastern city for a few days before returning to Wuji City. The day before they returned to Dayo, Renbocchen received a call from someone. The eight-armed race had just set off from the space station outside the node. It was a huge transit station that could accommodate 5,000 people, tens of thousands of robots, and a huge amount of resources. There were a total of 26 people from the eight-armed race, and 3 of them had an energy value of 30,000. The highest had even reached 45,000. There were still 2 months before they arrived on Earth. After returning to Earth again, he made a special trip to the imperial capital to meet many people, and the talks went smoothly. When it was time to stand up, they should stand up, and when it was time to ask for benefits, they should also ask for benefits. This wasn't the first time that both parties had dealt with each other. Although there had been several batches of people over the years, most of those who had retired were still alive. The newcomers also knew of this special existence and would communicate with him a few times, so they weren't too unfamiliar with him. This time around, both parties had their own needs and were well aware of each other's intentions. Renbocchen wouldn't make any excessive requests, so it could be considered harmonious. Next, he would return to Deo and wait for the arrival of the Ba Bai clan. Before that, he had something more important to do. In the palace of Deo, the Empress sat in the courtyard with one hand supporting her cheek and the other playing with a wine glass. Following her gaze, she could see Renbochin sitting cross-legged in the main hall. At this moment, 16 elemental crystals the size of 2 fingers were placed around Renbochin. Renbochin closed his eyes and immersed himself in darkness. Dong! 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 Every minute, the earth would jump, and some invisible and intangible things would flow into Renbochin's body. This was the chi of the earth embryo. With the help of this chi, Renbochin condensed his essence chi into a ball and used it to collide with the invisible barrier. Although the barrier couldn't be seen, it was extremely hard. After 2 years and countless collisions, Renbochin only felt a slight loosening. Now, the loosening was getting bigger and bigger. Renbochin accumulated his strength in the darkness. Every time his strength reached its peak, he would use the chi of the earth embryo to collide with the barrier. After an unknown period of time, Renbochin vaguely felt that there was a slight difference after this collision. He seemed to have heard a crack. It's about to open. Renbochin was elated. Open. Renbochin gathered his strength again and shook it. Open. On the 10th time, he felt a crack appear on the barrier. Open. 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 On the 20th time, the crack became bigger and bigger. Open for me. On the 30th time, the barrier was finally broken by him. The crack completely split open, and boundless energy poured into his body from the top of his head. It was as if a skylight had suddenly been opened in a dark and stuffy room without any doors or windows. Light shone through the crack and illuminated Renbochin's spirit. The boundless energy continued to pour into his spirit. Renbochin felt that his spirit was getting bigger and bigger, like a fatty full of energy. At the same time, there was a huge change in Renbochin's sea of knowledge. The quiet and lifeless universe seemed to be blown by a gust of wind. The entire universe suddenly came alive, and some indescribable changes were happening. The Empress, who was sitting in the courtyard, felt a gust of wind in the palace. With Renbochin as the center, all the energy emitted by the crystals was absorbed into his body. More energy swept in from all directions, forming a tornado that soared into the sky. The eye of the tornado was where Renbochin was. Mother, father has broken through. Duo Hua came out of nowhere. Wow, that's really worth celebrating. The Empress smiled and nodded. She had spent a lot of effort and used a lot of heavenly treasures. Back then, even the treasury of the palace was emptied. Renbochin had finally reached this step. It wasn't easy. With the energy emitted by the crystals as a supplement, Renbochin didn't take too long to break through. In just 2 hours, the wind above the palace had dissipated. However, the energy that was constantly emitted was still flowing into Renbochin's body. After another 2 hours, Renbochin opened his eyes with a smile on his face. He had finally broken through and skipped the path to heaven. His spirit was connected to the energy of heaven and earth, and he had directly reached the level of the spirit wheel. With a flick of his finger, he felt an immeasurable amount of energy condense at his fingertips. A pillar of fire that was slightly thicker than his finger and several meters long shot out. With a flip of his hand, the pillar of fire was extinguished. He raised his palm, causing the ground to tremble. Then, a row of stone needles that were more than 1 meter tall popped out. With another wave of his hand, boundless water fell from the sky. Renbochin tried using the 5 elements and was finally able to operate them as he wished. It wasn't easy. Congratulations, father. Congratulations. Duo Hua came in from the main hall with a smile. With a flick of his finger, a fist-sized stone ball appeared out of thin air and smashed toward Duo Hua's head. Duo Hua was even faster and disappeared in a flash. Yao Yao's clear voice fell from the sky and said, "You want to hit me as soon as you wake up." Ren Baqian laughed and moved his feet. The ground shortened under his feet, and he arrived in the courtyard in one step. The Water Empress let out a soft cry of surprise as a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. "Now that I have broken through, I understand that I can only be considered to have truly mastered the ancient scroll of methods." Ren Baqian smiled. He was extremely happy. The spirit wheel was only the foundation of the ancient scroll of methods, and it was only now that he was able to shine. Chapter 12:26. Ren Baqian spent a few days familiarizing himself with the situation after his breakthrough. The biggest change was that the time it took for him to travel between the two realms had been greatly reduced. Previously, when he was at the Earth Will level, he needed at least 2.5 days to travel between the two realms, and the longest time was half a month. After attaining the Spirit Will level, he only needed 1.5 days to transmigrate again, and the longest he could stay was 1 month. Ren Baqian guessed that when he reached the realm of opening up the sky and earth, he would need at least half a day to travel through space. Even if he only had 1.5 days, he still had a lot of leeway to do whatever he wanted. His body didn't change much. It was just that when he broke through to the Spirit Will level, his body was cleansed by the vital energy of heaven and earth, and his strength and speed were slightly enhanced. His physical body was incomparable to that of a Cardinal Heaven ancient race expert. However, compared to other Spirit Will experts, Ren Baqian's ability to communicate with vital energy was far superior. Furthermore, he had the ability to evolve the 5 elements using the universe in his sea of knowledge as a foundation. Combined with the chi of heaven and earth, he had some time to prepare and launch a big fireball with all his strength. The power was no less than a bomb containing a ton of TNT. It was difficult to use in actual combat. Although its power was not small, its speed was too slow. He needed at least 10 seconds to prepare, and his speed was about 100 meters per second. Given the reaction and speed of a Spirit Will expert and a Cardinal Heaven expert, it would be difficult to hit him unless he was entangled with someone. One had to know that Spirit Wheel and Cardinal Heaven experts could move at least dozens of meters in a second. If it was just an area of effect, it would at most cause some damage. In any case, Ren Baqian now had some ability to protect himself. Moreover, it was a true class change to a magical class. However, the true value of the ancient scroll of methods was not here. Ren Baqian sat in the garden and looked at the ancient scroll of methods in his hands. After advancing to the Spirit Will level, Ren Baqian was able to read a portion of the ancient scroll of methods, but he didn't expect the contents to be like this. Will concentration technique. When other people reached the Spirit Will level, they had to separate a part of their spirit to link their vital energy and condense it into a heaven-grade weapon. The weapon's power was incomparably great, and it also had all kinds of wonderful uses. Ren Baqian already knew about this and had seen a lot of it. For example, Blood Sea Demon's Blood Sea, Ma Hongyu's brush, and Li Yuanju's wooden sword. All of them had different functions. But this condensing will spiritual concentration technique was completely different from the others. What it gathered was the power of will. What was condensed was a god. Offering incense, gathering the power of faith, absorbing vitality, and finally forming a god in this world. The power of will and divine sense had some similarities. Ordinary people were unable to excavate divine sense, but by gathering the power of will of everyone in the world, they could gather sand to form a tower. This deity was formed from a strand of his spirit. This deity was his heaven-grade weapon and also his clone. In addition, this deity could also absorb willpower and feedback it to improve his cultivation. As for how much it would give back to him, it would depend on how close he was to this deity. People's hearts were complicated, and they prayed for different things. Health, wealth, men, women, love, kinship, hatred, desire. the wishes of the people who prayed to the gods contained everyone's thoughts. Therefore, even though the clone of the god used Rinpoche's divine sense as the core, it also contained countless distracting thoughts. The greater the connection between Rinpoche and the deity's clone, the more power he received, but the more distracting thoughts he received. On the other hand, if he received fewer distracting thoughts, the power of the feedback would be smaller. If he wasn't afraid of being attacked by countless distracting thoughts and had enough power of will, he would be able to break through from the spirit will level to the heaven and earth level in a few years. At this point, Rinpoche finally understood why he had to hover between life and death during the cultivation process of re-visualization. After experiencing countless deaths, his mind became as solid as steel, and he was able to accept more distracting thoughts without going crazy because of the countless distracting thoughts that rushed into his mind. Originally, he thought that it was to strengthen his divine sense so that he could practice the spirit-nurturing technique when he was at the earth embryo level, cross the path to heaven, and reach the spirit will level. Now, it seemed that he had thought too simply. After reading this will concentration technique a few times, Rinpoche closed the secret manual, closed his eyes, and sat there thinking. I don't know who created this technique, but it's really amazing. Compared to the technique of creating a heaven-grade weapon, it's a completely different approach. It condenses the deity and returns it to the body. Moreover, the body and the deity are two bodies, and the power is infinite. The benefits are naturally great, but the risks are also not small. The clone of the deity has its own consciousness and can even affect the body. This technique must be practiced. If I progress fast enough, I will have some combat power in the future when there is a war. However, I have to think about the details. This is to condense the power of wishes and become a deity. The deity is affected by the power of wishes and distracting thoughts. If the believers are peaceful, the clone of the deity will be peaceful. If the believers are cruel, the deity will be cruel. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair. If he wanted to condense the power of wishes, the best way was to form a religion. However, after thinking about it carefully, it didn't make much sense. Firstly, it was too time-consuming. Secondly, the greatest significance of this religion was to gather believers and become a deity. Starting a religion from scratch would take up a lot of time even if the country promoted it. The best way was to find a religion that had a certain foundation, a lot of followers, and a wide spread. As for the doctrine, if there were any parts that didn't suit him, it could be changed. This might be difficult for others, but it couldn't be any easier for Rinpoche. Currently, there were some religions in Dayo. The first to bear the brunt was Buddhism. There were many believers in Tianjin Basin and even in the Chuyun residence. As for Taoism, there were also many followers in the Chuyun residence. However, there were many Taoist temples, and the deities that the two temples worshipped were different. In order to make use of them, they had to be combined and compiled into a unified Taoist canon. This way, the time and effort required was about the same as creating a new religion. As for the Aboriginals, they worshipped their ancestors. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were violent. With the Aboriginals as the main believers, the clone of the deity would probably be violent and irritable. In addition, there was Lin Dong's righteous sect. In addition, there was also the Ajati matriarch, who was developing well among the foreign races. However, there were many foreign races, and many of them had a chaotic temperament, which could easily affect their temperament. In this case, Buddhism was the most suitable. Buddhism. I've always asked. I wonder if that monk saw anything. Rinpoche frowned. What are you thinking about? The Empress's voice came from beside him. Rinpoche opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly sat beside him. There's a technique in the ancient scroll of methods called prayers and concentration technique. Rinpoche briefly explained what he was thinking about just now. Prayers and concentration technique. The Empress finally repeated it softly. After thinking for a moment, she smiled and said, "This technique is quite interesting. A deity actually concentrates the hearts of the people. I wonder how it compares to the deity of the long-haired monster." Renbachien raised his eyebrows and said, "Maybe that's how the deity of the Earth Spirit tribe came about. The techniques might be different, but there might be similarities." The Empress thought about it carefully and nodded. "It's indeed possible. If that's the case, the human race might be able to condense a powerful deity. If it's so easy, the human race might not have been defeated back then." "How many people understand what happened back then?" the Empress said faintly. "Let's not think too much about it. When we meet the envoy from the 8-arm race from the Horned Dragon Galaxy, I'll start on this technique," Renbachien said as he held the Empress's hand. "It's better to be careful. Don't be blinded by it, or the loss will outweigh the gain. Don't worry, I know what to do. Since there are still a few days left, I'll make a trip to the East Sea and meet that monk. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 12:27. If there was a Buddhist nation in the East Sea, this would be it. When Renbachien came here decades ago, every family worshipped Buddha, and the shops on the streets were mostly related to Buddhism. There were countless restaurants that were famous for vegetarian food. It seems to be the same as decades ago. Renbachien looked down at the East Sea from the sky. It was completely different from Wuji City, which was full of sci-fi style. Over the past decades, the East Sea had been expanded and renovated, but overall, it didn't seem to have changed much. The flying car landed in the East Sea and headed for the Jingxin Temple. Most people who came here were like this, showing respect from the bottom of their hearts. There were even many people who walked to the temple as if they were on a pilgrimage. The #1 temple in the world wasn't the result of a commercial operation. "It looks quite comfortable this way," the Empress said softly. This style was similar to the first time she came to Earth. "Is this an ancient city? I've heard from others that the abbot here is very powerful. I wonder if he can beat me." Erhua held her cheek with one hand and rolled her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. How can this be considered an ancient city after a few decades? Don't get any ideas. Renbachien patted her head. That monk was very strange. He had long wanted to come again, but he always had scruples and couldn't make it in the end. He could feel the strong Buddhist atmosphere in the East Sea, and it was even more so at the foot of the mountain. Even the air was filled with the fragrance of sandalwood. As he followed the crowd up the mountain, he saw people lining up to enter the mountain gate. Many people froze as soon as they stepped through the gate. All kinds of past events flowed into their minds, and all kinds of emotions surged from the bottom of their hearts. Some were crying, some were remorseful, and some were determined. This was the heart-refining sect. The middle gate was for people who came here for the first time, and it had the effect of refining their minds. The 2 doors on both sides, one for entering and the other for exiting, didn't have the effect of refining their minds. As if it was his first time here, Renbachien, the Empress, and Erhua lined up to enter the middle gate. Renbachien was in a trance as he passed through the heart-refining sect. His second time here didn't have any effect. When he looked back, he saw Erhua standing there with a complicated look on her face. She was gritting her teeth with great sorrow and joy, as if she had opened a dyeing workshop. Renbachien didn't know what this devil incarnate had learned from this sect and was a little curious. Then, she burst into tears. When he walked out of the heart-refining gate, his eyes turned red and he said, "I remember the 2 of you fighting together again. It's like I've been beaten up a few times. You're already an adult, yet you've learned to hold a grudge." Renbachien casually slapped the back of her head. Then, he turned his head and looked at the inside of the temple. Compared to the past, the Tranquil Heart Temple was many times bigger. There were countless people in the temple, and it was unknown how many monks were passing through. It was dignified, grand, and caused others to not dare act rashly. Just by standing here, it caused one's mind to feel calm and tranquil, without joy or sorrow. Greetings, benefactors. Please follow me. A middle-aged monk walked to the three of them and placed his palms together. Renbochin immediately understood that the monk knew that he was coming. After crossing a small bridge, Renbochin looked at the huge lotus flowers in the middle of the pond. A fragrance that calmed one's mind was emitted from it. The last time Renbochin came here, he didn't notice it. This time, however, he realized that the lotus wasn't an ordinary item. It was very beneficial to him. In particular, the effect of calming one's mind was very beneficial to his future practice of concentration technique. When they arrived at the main hall, Renbochin first lit a stick of incense, walked into the hall, and bowed to the Buddha statue in the hall. This was what he was supposed to do. He looked up and saw that the Buddha statue had its head lowered as if it was looking at him. He turned around and walked out of the main hall, following the middle-aged monk to the back of the mountain. Along the way, there were all kinds of wild beasts, such as foxes, black bears, and large snakes. All kinds of wild beasts wandered around the temple and didn't avoid people. They were gentle, deeply influenced by Buddhism, and seemed to have become spirits. When they arrived at the back of the mountain, they saw a middle-aged monk in a white robe standing there with a warm smile on his face. He placed his palms together and greeted the three of them. Greetings, benefactors. Greetings. Renbochin cupped his hands and was surprised. The last time he met him was when he had just obtained the Empress's martial arts. 60 years had passed on earth. At that time, this monk was around 30 years old. Now, he should be around 100 years old, right? He actually looked like he was in his 40s. Taoists cultivated one's nature and life. They cultivated an impenetrable body and had their own way of cultivation. Therefore, there were many Taoists who were over 100 years old. Buddhism cultivated one's nature and not life. Their physical body was just a cage, and they rarely cultivated it. Renbochin didn't know how this monk did it. Su Wen seemed to know what Renbochin was thinking. He chuckled and said, Buddhism also cultivates a raft to cross the sea of bitterness. Renbochin was deep in thought. Great monk, are you the master of great monk Xing Ruo? Hua asked. How is Xing Ruo? Su Wen asked with a smile. Not very good. He has had enough of being a vegetarian. He formed a band with me to eat and drink, Hua said with a mischievous smile. Su Wen chuckled and said, he can cultivate both in and out of the world. Arhat also has a wife and children. The Empress glanced at him and asked, what are you trying to say, monk? Su Wen smiled and didn't answer. He stretched out his hand and said, benefactors, please follow me. The few of them entered the house and sat down. A moment later, someone served a plate of fruits. The fragrance of the fruits was tempting. Hua couldn't help but take a bite. The flesh of the fruit melted into a sweet and fragrant liquid and entered his stomach. Then, it turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs. Hua's eyes widened. She knew a lot about Earth. The essence qi here was sparse, and there were very few rare treasures. There was almost nothing that caught her eye. She didn't expect that this monk would have such a good thing. Abbot, do you know why I'm here? Renbochin took a bite of the fruit and asked with a straight face. I know a thing or two. Please go ahead. Everyone in the world is Buddha. Everyone worships Buddha, but they don't know how to worship the Buddha in their hearts, Su Wen said and smiled. If Buddha can accept it, so can Arhat. Renbochin's face darkened. This monk indeed knew. Who are you exactly? Su Wen's eyelids drooped and said, I am Buddha. Renbochin's gaze was as sharp as a knife, but Su-wen didn't seem to notice it. Renbochin thought for a while and his expression suddenly eased up. He smiled and said, "If I establish another sect, what will you do?" The teachings passed down by the Buddha are cultivated by the mortals, and they are Buddhists. Even if it is called the Divine Sect, Taoism, or the White Lotus Sect, why not? How should the teachings passed down by Arhat be named? What impact will it have? Su-wen's words hit the nail on the head. According to him, Renbochin was Arhat and also a Buddha. No matter what the name of the sect he passed down was or what the content was, the fundamentals wouldn't change. Renbochin understood this point and pointed at Su-wen. He shook his head and said, "You have already understood everything. Everything starts from Arhat's heart." Su-wen shook his head. "But it has nothing to do with me." "Father, why are you talking in riddles with the big monk?" Hua rolled his eyes a few times. "It's nothing." Renbochin shook his head gently. He had already understood the monk's words. "Abbot, what do you want to teach me?" Renbochin thought for a while and asked. "Arhat, you just have to follow your heart." Renbochin shook his head and acted as if he didn't say anything. Since this was the case, there was nothing more to say. This monk was too weird. He really couldn't imagine how there could be such a person on earth. Renbochin thought to himself, "You have a lot of good stuff here. Whatever you want, Arhat, just take it. Plant it around the temple and receive incense offerings every day. Then, it will live." Renbochin didn't stand on ceremony. He spent half a day walking around the back mountain of the tranquil temple with Su-wen. He even packed a few bags of lotus seeds, impermanent rice, and various fruits for planting. The next day, there was news. Su-wen had passed away in meditation. Renbochin was stunned when he heard the news. It was as if he had been waiting for Renbochin to come and fight him. Chapter 12:28. Renbochin wasn't sure whether this strange monk was dead or not. If there were bones, Renbochin really wanted to dig them out. However, it was said that Su-wen had left behind some instructions for his funeral in the main hall when he suddenly dissipated. He was like a statue made of mud. He had suddenly dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Not even a speck of dust was left behind. All that was left were a few pearls, which were said to be relics. They looked similar to glass balls. Some people said that Su-wen had become a Buddha, but it didn't seem like it. The news from the Jingshin temple said that he had passed away. Renbochin couldn't be bothered to find out what was going on with this monk. The envoy from the eight-armed race was about to arrive on Earth. Renbochin first went back to Dayo and brought some people back. The Empress was an expert who had one foot in the longevity heaven realm, but she was the only one, which seemed to be lacking in grandeur. After all, the significance of one expert and a group of experts was completely different. Besides, no one knew what would happen after the eight-armed race arrived, and he couldn't let the Empress show up for everything. As for the candidates, Renbochin pulled a few aboriginal experts from the longevity heaven over. In any case, these people only had muscles in their heads and killing people. They were 100 times more barbaric than the officials in the imperial court. Even if they came into contact with Earthlings, they wouldn't be able to figure out that they were on another planet. Moreover, even if they knew that they were on another planet, it wouldn't affect them much. Renbochin selected Axine Cho, Ben Ding, Su Fang, and Zhu Puhua from the list. Axine Cho wasn't far from the intermediate level of the longevity heaven. Moreover, all four of them had brains filled with muscles and slaughter. They were boorish fellows who would either fight to the death, or fight to the death. This included the giant garden flower. There was a slight fluctuation in the air, and 5 figures appeared in the room. They felt their vision blur, and they were transported from the palace to another place, which surprised them. They were considered the strongest of the human race, but they didn't expect that the prince could bring them to another place in the blink of an eye. Your Majesty. They came back to their senses from the unfamiliar decorations and saw the Empress watching a television program on a projector. The Empress's clothes were rather peculiar and completely different from Dayo's. Her hair was also casually scattered behind her head. Even the majesty of her body seemed to have lessened. The few of them felt that it was strange, but they didn't think much of it. Now that we are here, listen to Zhao Prince Consort's arrangements and don't cause any trouble. The Empress looked up and glanced at them. Where is this? The giant garden flower asked curiously. The chaotic star sea, Renbochin replied casually. In any case, they didn't know where it was. The rules here are different from those in Dayo. You can't hurt people at will. If you get into trouble, you will be exiled here forever, Renbochin said. Their expressions changed a few times. Compared to the outside of the Wall of Two Realms, there was almost no vitality here. In addition to the strange smell that they could faintly smell, being exiled here was probably worse than being imprisoned. Renbochin pressed a button on the wall and gave a few instructions. Very soon, the winged cavalry warriors brought the four of them away. Next, the four of them indulged in the ergotu. Unfortunately, even though the meat was improved from the meat he brought back, it was still far inferior to the ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, let alone the ones outside the Wall of Two Worlds. Not to mention the fact that there was almost no energy in the meat. Fortunately, there were many ways to cook it, and with the addition of various seasonings, it was a refreshing experience for them. After eating nearly 5,000 kilograms of meat and a ton of ergotu for a whole day, they didn't have the opportunity to cause any trouble. The next day, Renbochin and the Empress brought everyone onto 3 medium-sized flying cars. Half a day later, everyone landed on an island chain in the Pacific Ocean. 8 small and medium-sized islands surrounded and protected a medium-sized island like stars surrounding the moon. This joint base, which nominally belonged to the entire world, was actually jointly guarded by a few major United Nations organizations and a few powerful countries. Mr. Ren, Miss Chi. Renbochin saw an old man and a few generals when he landed from the sky. Oldly, I didn't expect you to come. Thank you for your trouble. Renbochin looked friendly and shook hands with the other party. This old man was also an old man who often appeared in the News Federation. However, Renbochin had dealt with him decades ago. Oldly has become oldly. I have to admit that I'm old. I'm envious to see Mr. Ren and Miss Chi, the old man said with a gentle smile and a tinge of envy in his eyes. When he first met Renbochin, they were about the same age. Now, he had the power that countless people envied, but time was like a knife that made people grow old. However, time seemed to have stopped for the other party. How could he not be envious? Those with power were most afraid of time. Which emperor, king, general, and minister didn't want to live forever? Both parties went to the base to talk for a while before Renbochin went back to rest. That Empress has an energy response of 63,000. As for these 4 people, this man has an energy response of 19,000, and the other 3 have an energy response of 15,000 to 17,000. Mr. Ren has an energy response of 2,800. In another room, Oldly listened to his subordinate and was a little absent-minded. 63,000. When she caused trouble in the United States last time, her energy response was only 20,000. Furthermore, those 4 people are much stronger than those people from the previous time. Those people from the previous time had an energy response of about 4,000. They can be said to be human-shaped nuclear bombs, and they are much more threatening than nuclear bombs. Nuclear bombs are dead, but humans are alive. Such people can be said to be gods, and humans are completely unable to resist them. Our most powerful Earth-class expert doesn't have an energy value of more than 1,500, another old man in military uniform said. It should be the so-called hierarchy. Renbachien has obviously surpassed the Earth class and is already at the Heaven class. As for the Empress and the others, they should be at a higher level or even two. Don't consider their threat. As long as no one provokes them, they won't do anything. After so many years, we should rest assured, Oldly said softly. If possible, no one wanted to have such a person in the world who could take their life with a wave of his hand. It was like a ferocious tiger sneaking into a rabbit's nest. However, the example of the United States was still in front of them. They really couldn't be provoked. Moreover, in front of those foreign races, they are the protectors of us humans. The stronger they are, the better. Oldly leaned back in his chair with a calm expression. Without them, how would we dare to meet those foreign races so easily? The Thunder Barbarians on the four-leaf grass planet have already explained that ferocious tigers will only fight with ferocious tigers. As soon as he said this, everyone nodded one after another. No matter what thoughts they had, they kept them at the bottom of their hearts. At noon the next day, Renbachien received the news after lunch. He and the Empress brought Xian Cho and the others to meet up with Oldly and some other generals. They took a flying car to a building on another island. The huge platform outside was where the spacecraft would land. There were also high-level officials from the Rising Sun City, the United States, and other countries here. When they saw Renbachien and the Empress, they greeted them with kindness and fear in their eyes. After waiting for half an hour, they saw a black dot in the sky getting bigger and bigger. A medium-sized spacecraft that was 1,000 meters long spewed out 16 blue flames and slowed down as it descended. As the ground shook slightly, everyone became alert. This was the first time that Earth had welcomed extraterrestrial guests. Chapter 1229. This is Earth. The home of those humans. In space, a lady dressed in a luxurious robe looked at the screen in front of her. On it was the image of the outside world of the spaceship. It was a blue planet. The lady had short hair and was not particularly beautiful. However, she had a dignified aura that would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw her. 6 arms extended from the back of the robe. However, what caught people's attention the most was that each of her arms was emitting a faint golden glow as if they were made of metal. They were completely different from the other members of the 8-armed race. Third shaman, we're finally here. Another lady from the 8-armed race let out a long sigh. It was a novelty when they first boarded the spaceship. However, after a few months, the novelty faded and only boredom was left. I don't even dare to train here. I'm afraid that I'll crush those weak humans and the equally weak spaceship. Although those humans are weak, their things are quite interesting. We can move those interesting things back to the mother planet. They won't have any objections anyway. Of course, once we arrive at that place called Earth, even if they have any objections, it will depend on our mood. The 200 square meter room was furnished with a sofa, a soft bed, and a bar counter. Such a large room on the spaceship was considered extravagant. 6 ladies from the 8-armed race were either standing or sitting in the room. They were of different ages. The only thing they had in common was that they all had 8 arms. Other than the third shaman, 2 of them had arms that emitted different shades of metallic luster. From their positions and expressions, it was clear that the third shaman of the 8-arm race had the highest status. The third shaman gestured for everyone to stop. According to those humans, there are powerhouses among them too. Those humans are so weak. The strongest among them is only a member of the 4-armed race. Those so-called powerhouses are only the strongest among the humans, one of the 8-armed race ladies said casually. The third shaman did not refute. She had a similar opinion. No matter what, the most important thing this time is to understand the situation of the humans and get them to teach us how to build spaceships that can travel in the astral world. Apart from that, their technology is also very useful to our race, the third shaman said slowly. In the 8-armed race's knowledge system, the astral world was beyond the mother planet. In the language of the humans, it was called outer space. Therefore, we are not allowed to act recklessly. It's best that humans are weak. We can make more things. The third priest warned. Then, his tone changed. Of course, we have to let them understand the gap between us and them. Lord Priestess, please don't worry, the others said one after another. The third shaman's lips curled into a smile. This was the plan that they had decided on before they came. To them, humans were as fragile as children. Even if they possessed powerful weapons and some useful technology, in the face of true power, everything had to bow down to it. Originally, it was the astral world that prevented them from exerting their power. However, when they came to Earth, it was like a baby with a huge fortune who opened the door to protect himself. At this moment, in the command hall, there was a wavy pattern in the air in one of the corners. When one got closer, one could hear voices. It was the voices of the 8-armed race members conversing in the hall. Have you analyzed it? What are they talking about? The commander in the general uniform asked in a deep voice. No. This language is different from their official language. It's their ancient language that ordinary people can't grasp. It's only used by the royal family, the nobles, and the temple. Therefore, we don't have enough samples and can't analyze it for the time being. Furthermore, this language involves some very complicated things. When they use this language, a strange magnetic field will appear. This will take a longer time to analyze. Forget it. No matter what they are planning. The base is ready. The commander relaxed his brows. He hoped that everything would go smoothly. It was said that the demons were in the base and should be able to contend against the 8-armed race members. The commander was more concerned about his family and would be able to see them soon. Half an hour later, with a slight vibration, everyone in the command hall cheered. They were finally home. Informed the envoys of the 8-armed race. Although the commander hadn't completely relaxed, he wasn't as tense as before. At the large space station outside the node, everyone and the spacecraft had been inspected to prevent the microorganisms from the Horned Dragon galaxy from being brought to Earth. Otherwise, they would have to go through 2 weeks of quarantine before they could go home. However, they only needed to settle everything in 3 days before they could go on vacation. As the door of the spacecraft opened, Renbachyan looked at the honor guards in formal attire lining up on both sides of the red carpet. This gave him a sense of déjà vu when he watched the news broadcasts of various heads of state visiting. It seems like there should be flowers at this time. Renbachyan thought. Then, he saw 4 beautiful women selected from various countries standing at the bottom of the gangway with flowers in their hands. Renbachyan had a strange expression on his face. He didn't know who had arranged this welcoming ceremony. Aiming nuclear bombs and 100 electromagnetic cannons at this place is a better way to express the goodwill of humans than flowers, Renbachyan said softly with a smile. His voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough for the people around him to hear. The others acted as if they didn't hear anything. There were high-level officials from various countries here. Even if they weren't the top few, who would dare to aim nuclear bombs at this place? A few experts came out first. They were all real experts who were responsible for communicating with the 8-armed race. Then, they saw a few tall figures of women with arms that looked like the 1,000-armed Guanyin. They are here. The envoys of the various countries made preparations to welcome the extraterrestrial guests. Suddenly, a ripple seemed to explode in the air, and a huge amount of energy exploded in front of them. From the Ba-armed race's envoys, there seemed to be energy pillars that reached the sky. A huge pressure came from the front, causing people to lower their heads and not dare to look directly at them. Bastard! Everyone had the same thought in their minds. What are they going to do? Everyone tried their best to straighten their spines and necks, wanting to look directly at the other party. They were the top group of people on Earth, and they represented humanity. No one wanted to bow down to the extraterrestrial guests. However, the huge difference in strength made every bone in their bodies groan. If the other party had the intention to kill, at least half of the people present would have exploded and died under this huge pressure. Fortunately, another huge aura erupted from the crowd at this time, reducing the pressure brought by the 8-arm race's envoys by more than half. The Empress, who was dressed in red, sneered with a cold look in her eyes as she strode forward. These damned foreign races. Although the Empress didn't mind being used as a weapon when there were benefits, she wouldn't be so proactive. However, these envoys from the 8-arm race reminded her of the damned foreign races outside the wall of the two world. She thought about the battle that had just ended. She thought about the people who had died. This gave her the urge to slap the other party to death. Streaks of barbaric and wild patterns appeared on the Empress's body. A few tall figures followed the Empress and walked out from the crowd. Their faces were filled with malevolent murderous intent. These ancient race experts, who were like savages, exploded the moment their auras collided. Die! Ha! The expert from the 8-arm race, who was standing in front of the gangway, exclaimed in surprise. Chapter 1230. The aura of the Empress was like a sharp sword that pierced through the mountain-like aura of the people from the 8-armed race, greatly reducing the pressure on the rest of the people. At the same time, the people from the 8-armed race were astonished. The humans have such experts. The expressions of the people from the 8-armed race changed, and they looked gloomy. If the humans had such experts, they wouldn't be able to use many of their tricks. But how was that possible? After interacting with the 8-armed race for a few months, they could tell that the humans didn't have any experts through their actions and words. Especially when the experts from the 8-armed race demonstrated their strength, the humans' shock and disbelief weren't a lie. This convinced them that the strength of the 8-armed race and above was beyond the reach of an individual human and even beyond their knowledge. From their observations, ordinary humans weren't even comparable to the children of the 8-armed race. The experts among the humans were only equivalent to the 4-armed members of the 8-armed race, which could be achieved as long as they reached adulthood. The various performances made the 8-armed race believe that although the humans had advanced technology that they didn't have, the humans were naturally weak and had low individual strength. They possessed powerful weapons and technology, but their actual strength was weak. This kind of race inevitably gave them some ideas. Just like children with guns, although dangerous, their threat would be greatly reduced as long as they weren't given a chance to attack. Furthermore, these children had a huge amount of wealth that made people drool. Of course, the 8-armed race wasn't as rude and vicious as the Thunder Barbarians, and they weren't as arrogant as the Thunder Barbarians. What they wanted was to get what they wanted at the lowest cost, especially those technologies that they coveted, spaceships, crew members that helped them operate the spaceships, and other things that they were interested in. As such, they were prepared to display their strength as soon as they got off the spaceship and see how the humans would respond. However, they didn't expect to encounter humans who could rival them as soon as they arrived on Earth. And they weren't alone. The lady in red at the front seemed to have an aura similar to that of the third priest and was one step away from the ancestral reversion realm. The people behind her were slightly weaker, but they were also at the blood birth realm. The third priest's expression changed. The queens and the high priest had guessed wrongly. There were actually experts among the humans. This was going to be troublesome. If they hadn't provoked them earlier, they would naturally be able to communicate peacefully. However, they first released their auras and pressured the humans with their auras. They couldn't hold back now. The third priest was muttering to himself. The rest of the people had withdrawn their auras and focused on the Empress. Both parties were at loggerheads. At this moment, the Empress leaped tens of meters into the air without saying a word. Her snow-white fist appeared out of thin air, and everyone seemed to see a gigantic fist that was tens of meters in size appear in the air. Like a cannonball, it blasted toward the Empress. The expressions of everyone at the back changed drastically. Everyone was grateful that this great demon had stepped forward to stop the ill-intentioned Baopai people. Even the Americans who had half of the city destroyed by her felt the same way. However, no one expected that she would brazenly make a move without saying a word. The foreign ambassadors had just arrived on Earth and hadn't even gotten off the spaceship. Without saying a single word, she had already made her move. This was too ferocious. It was too barbaric. It was too satisfying. When it came to scheming, and fighting for benefits, humans were not weaker than any other race. Just now, the 8-arm race had used their aura to suppress everyone. Everyone only needed to think a bit to understand their intentions. Although everyone felt that it was a little rude to see the Empress making a move, they were happy to teach the 8-armed race a lesson. How dare you! A member of the 8-arm race with a greenish-gray metallic sheen on his arms leaped into the air. As he waved his 8 arms, a huge greenish-gray flower bloomed in the air like a lotus platform. This lotus-like flower didn't look eye-catching, but it was extremely dangerous. Those who were close to it could feel a gust of wind brushing past their faces, leaving behind a bloody scar. The moment the gigantic fist in the air touched the edge of the lotus platform, it was as if it was cut by a knife. In the air, the patterns on the Empress's body became denser and covered almost all of her exposed skin. Her aura rose again and again, and she charged into the lotus platform with large strides. Boom! The two of them separated in the air as soon as they came into contact. The lotus platform disappeared, and a figure shot out and crashed directly into the spaceship. The fist that was tens of meters in size in the air was frightening. It gathered all of its strength in one place and didn't release it at all. This was what it was like to hit someone. The Empress stood in the air and looked down at the Baopai people's ambassadors. She stared coldly at one of the 8-armed women in a long robe with a faint golden metallic sheen. The third priest looked up and saw that the victor had been decided in one move. The third priest already knew that he was the only one who could stop the Empress. All of you, stand down. The third priest said as everyone walked out from the back. She was holding a long staff with both hands. The people beside her bowed and revealed the 8 long knives on their backs. The third priest could reach out and pull them out. The battle between the Empress and the third priest was about to start at any moment. Everyone could feel the killing intent in the air. At this moment, everyone heard a loud, "Hey, hey, hey! Can you hear me? Are you here to fight? Or is this your etiquette?" The Baopai people. The sound was as sharp and ear-piercing as metal scraping against each other, almost piercing their eardrums. Everyone wanted to cover their ears when they heard this sound. They turned around and saw a bald man holding a megaphone that was more than 3 meters long. The higher-ups of the various countries were at a loss. Where did this megaphone come from? Isn't this human etiquette? The third priest turned around and looked at Rinpoche as his voice rang in everyone's ears. Your Chinese is not bad. You know the whole story. If this continues, we will think that the Baopai people are here to demonstrate their might and want to provoke a war with the humans. All the people from the Baopai people glared at Rinpoche. The third priest's eyes were also filled with coldness. The eyes of the leaders of the various countries twitched. Oldly looked at Rinpoche and then at the people from the Baopai people who had yet to disembark from the spaceship. Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Put down the flowers and pick up your weapons. The Americans almost jumped up when they heard this. However, before they could finish, they were stopped by the man in the middle. "Shut up, Brown. If they want war, we will give them war." Of course, everyone knew that this was impossible, but they still had to show their attitude. The people from the other countries pondered for a while and didn't speak again. Now, humans were on the same side. When he heard the voice behind him, Renbachien said in a deep voice, "Our goal is peace. We want the intelligent races to develop together and advance hand in hand. This is the common pursuit of all intelligent races. However, if you want war, then we will give you war." Although the third priest didn't fully understand, he realized that everyone's gaze had changed. The human soldiers in the distance dispersed into battle formations and picked up their long-barreled weapons. "This is troublesome." The third priest frowned. These humans were tougher than she thought. Most importantly, there were experts among the humans who could compete with them. Their plan couldn't be realized from the start. "Sir!" The people from the Ba Pai people behind her drew their weapons and got into a defensive stance. The third priest pressed her arm down and said, "Everyone, stop." She then looked up at the Empress and placed her hands on her chest. "We came with goodwill." Chapter 12:31. Gullies appeared on the surface of the sea as if the sea had been cut into several sections. Then, the seawater flowed backward, creating huge waves. 100 meters above the sea, two figures were moving so fast that the human eye couldn't keep up with their speed. Only by slowing down the speed by 10 times could one barely see the blurry figures. It was unknown how many pairs of eyes were watching all of this from behind the screen. Many people had shocked expressions on their faces. Looking at all the data, the Empress in red was much stronger than when she was in the United States. The most surprising thing was that the envoy from the 8 Arms race had an energy value of 45,000, but it was now close to 60,000. The Empress in red usually had an energy value of 30,000, but when her body was covered with dark purple patterns, her energy value soared to 60,000 as well. Both of their strengths had increased by a large margin. Many people took pictures of the patterns on the surface of the Empress's skin to study what they contained. These patterns are likely to be something like an energy transmission circuit structure. If we can study it and put it on the surface of the skin, it can increase our strength. Unfortunately, a large number of the patterns are blocked by her clothes. We need those blocked patterns to gain something. A bespectacled man looked obsessively at the patterns on an enlarged picture. He turned his head and looked at the others with anticipation. The others pretended not to hear him. Who would dare to make such a request? They probably wouldn't even have the chance to collect their corpses. Renbachien sat cross-legged on the beach as the battle between the Empress and the third priest appeared in the air in front of him. More than 20 people from the 8 Arms race stood 100 meters away. Following the intense collision between the two, huge waves exploded on the surface of the sea as if countless bombs were exploding in the water. The two of them separated again after a brief collision, and their figures remained in the air. The color of the Empress's skin was already indistinguishable. It was completely covered in dark purple patterns as if she was possessed. Her eyes were bloodshot and looked like they were about to drip blood. Her red clothes were slightly damaged, and there were bloodstains on her hands. The staff in the third priest's hand was almost deformed, and only 4 of the 6 sabers were left. Phew! The Empress let out a long breath as the patterns on her body began to recede. She moved her feet and walked toward the beach. This was just a sparring match, and it wasn't a fight to the death. If they continued fighting, it would be difficult to stop. This was the 3rd day since the 8 Arms race arrived on Earth. Both sides intended to spar and test each other's skills. After all, strength was strength, and combat ability was combat ability. Take the Earth Spirit Clan for example. Their ability to use their power was very low, and they couldn't compare to humans at the same level. On the other hand, the 8-armed race's fighting ability wasn't weak. At the same level, they weren't any weaker than humans. The Empress was having a hard time fighting them. It was especially so when the 6 sabers were brandished like a storm of blades. On the other hand, the long staff was both offensive and defensive. How was it? Renbachien stood up and asked when he saw the Empress land on the beach. Not bad. The Water Empress nodded slightly as a form of praise. Over the years, the Empress had fought with many experts. Her confidence and foresight had been nurtured through countless battles. For them to take the initiative to praise the other party, it was evident that the strength of the 8-armed race wasn't weak. The envoy this time was only the 3rd high priest. Above him were 2 other high priests, many queens, and some other experts. In particular, the high priest and the queens were all experts who had taken that step. Even the Empress found it difficult to face them head-on. Sure enough, Earth and Deo can't be connected at all. It's the same as when the heaven-grade weapon was brought over and directly cut off contact with its original owner. Furthermore, that ancestral mark has nothing to do with one's blood chi, Renbachien said casually. When the Empress unleashed her blood chi with all her might, an illusory human figure filled with savagery would appear behind her. As her strength increased, the illusory figure would become more solid and increase her strength to a certain extent. At present, it could increase her strength by at least 15%. However, when she unleashed her full strength on Earth, the illusory figure didn't appear. It was evident that the illusory figure was only related to the world that Deo was in and had nothing to do with blood chi. That is the mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world, the Empress said. Renbachien nodded. According to the Empress, that was a mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world. When the strength of the human race reached a certain level and activated their blood chi with all their might, that mark would condense. This was something that current technology couldn't understand. Renbachien turned to look at the Empress. Although her expression was cold, he could see the joy in her eyes and that she was in a good mood due to their familiarity. With her strength, she was already invincible among the human race. Furthermore, she rarely had the opportunity to fight with experts from the foreign races. It was rare for her to meet an opponent who was similar in strength to her. If we establish friendly relations with the 8-armed race, there will be more opportunities to learn from each other in the future. When your majesty improves, you can learn from the queens of the 8-armed race. Renbachien said. Not bad. The Empress nodded and was in a better mood. Someone was already waiting at the side. After the 2 parties bade farewell, they took the 8-armed race delegation elsewhere and officially began their visit to Earth. Until now, the 8-armed race still couldn't understand why the Empress, with her strength and bearing, wasn't a member of the upper echelons of the human race. In their opinion, the leader of a race was usually the strongest person in the race. However, humans were completely different. The higher-ups of the human race that they saw were all very weak. Renbachien felt that this was normal. In his opinion, in the absence of external enemies, the higher the level of civilization, the lower the value of individual strength. After leaving the base, Renbachien and the Empress went to another laboratory to conduct a test on the Earth Spirit. The results were as expected. When the Earth Spirit died on Earth, the electromagnetic waves dispersed by 10 meters before dissipating. They didn't disappear into thin air like they did in Deo. It was as if they had entered another space and were sent back after their bodies recovered. It was like uploading and downloading data. On Earth, the electromagnetic waves would disperse after traveling for 30 feet, just like ordinary electromagnetic waves, before finally dissipating. At the same time, the physical recovery ability of the Earth Spirit also disappeared. It was a little unexpected, but it was also reasonable. Renbachien reckoned that it was because the life form they shared wasn't in the same world, so they couldn't transmit life force. After obtaining the results of the experiment, Renbachien was even more interested in the deity of the Earth Spirit. Whether it was life-sharing or divine sense, soul, they could be transmitted and received just like uploading and downloading data. If he could crack this ability, he would be able to create an immortal body. Ren Baqian thought about it. Even if he could crack the uploading and downloading ability of divine sense, he could use cloning technology to directly replace the body and create an immortal body. Furthermore, he wouldn't have to worry about being captured and tortured to death like the Earth Spirit. Ren Baqian felt excited at the thought of this, but the biggest problem was how to capture the deity of the Earth Spirit. Based on the deity's ability to break through space, it was impossible to capture him. Chapter 1232. In Ren Baqian's Sea of Knowledge, there was a planet that was green but had no vitality. A towering Buddha statue that reached the clouds sat on the ground. The face of the Buddha statue looked 70% similar to Ren Baqian's. There was a 5-colored luster around it that was constantly changing. Ren Baqian's figure floated in front of the head of the Buddha statue, nodding his head as he looked at his work. To practice this wish concentration technique, one had to condense a statue of a deity with the power of the 5 elements in the Sea of Knowledge. According to the ancient scroll of methods, the 5 elements were formed in the Sea of Knowledge, and then the statue of a deity was condensed from the 5 elements. Ren Baqian knew very well that his cultivation was different from others. He had shrunk his Sea of Knowledge into a singularity and then exploded it to create a universe. This was the result of his previous studies and the understanding of the universe that he had obtained. If others didn't have this knowledge, it would be impossible to have such a universe, let alone form a planet. After all, the formation of each person's Sea of Knowledge was related to their knowledge of the world. The Sea of Knowledge of others was either chaotic with the 5 elements or a small world, and the statue that condensed would occupy most of the Sea of Knowledge. However, Ren Baqian was different. The universe in his Sea of Knowledge was too big. If he wanted to erect a statue that occupied most of the world in the universe, he didn't know how long it would take. After thinking for a long time, he simply condensed such a Buddha statue on a planet. Presumably, this statue was about the same size as the predecessors. The condensation of this statue was only the first step. It was just an empty frame made of clay and wood. Next, he had to use the power of the Sea of Knowledge to nurture this statue and bring it to life step by step until it became a seed. Then, he could proceed to the next step, which was to cut it out and connect it with incense. It would receive worship throughout the 4 seasons and become a deity. The most difficult thing for others was to accumulate incense, but it was the easiest for Ren Baqian. The only problem was that it required time. In the situation of ruling a country, Ren Baqian didn't lack any external things. I don't know if this deity can make a wish, such as growing some hair. Ren Baqian touched his bald head and felt that it felt pretty good. It was as smooth as a mirror. Hair didn't matter much, but the rest was a big worry for him. Vultures didn't look good. Then, he went to another planet to take a look. The land of the planet was densely packed with stone tablets. It was like a forest of tablets. At a glance, there were hundreds of thousands or even millions of them. Every stone tablet was equivalent to a book. Ren Baqian would flip through the books and record them every time he returned to Earth. It didn't take much time to record a book. These stone tablets included all aspects of his life and were his most important savings. Even if he were to be trapped in Dayo one day and never be able to return to Earth, these stone tablets would be enough to support the foundation of Dayo's technology and develop it to a certain level. After coming out of his Sea of Knowledge, he smelled the Empress's fragrance and hugged her. In terms of height, Ren Baqian was only 5 centimeters taller than the Empress. Both of them looked about the same when they stood side by side. In terms of body size, Ren Baqian could fit 3 of her. However, the Empress could defeat 8 of them with a single finger. For the next few days, he nurtured the statue and practiced the use of the 5 elements. He was able to manifest the power of the 5 elements before attaining the spirit will level, but he was clumsy in his operation. Now that he could communicate with heaven and earth through his sea of knowledge, his control of the 5 elements had increased tremendously. Even though he couldn't command them as if they were his own arms, he could use a lot more techniques and play some tricks. For example, the 5 Fireballs sect. Rinpoche felt that he had finally become the tall, rich, and handsome mage of his dreams. A mage who was 175 meters tall and weighed 150 kilograms was a beautiful sight to behold. Other than that, he would return to Earth with the Empress from time to time to participate in the meetings between the various countries and the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race. The various countries were still wary of the 8 Arms race, and the Empress would usually be present during the meetings. When facing the aliens, the people of Earth were united. However, the various countries were also cautious. For example, the United States seemed to have had many contacts with the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race in private. Their intentions were easy to guess. More than 20 years ago on Earth, the former Rinpoche, the Empress, and a few others defeated a large country. Even the president at that time was pushed out as a scapegoat. Such a humiliation wouldn't be easily forgotten even after more than 20 years had passed. Rinpoche simply looked on coldly from the sidelines. No matter what intentions they had, there were only a few people in the 8 Arms race who could pose a threat to the Empress, and the United States was close at hand. Rinpoche was more concerned about the progress of the multi-party negotiations. Earth would provide technological support to the 8 Arms race, including but not limited to industrial, agricultural, smelting, and medical resources as well as the training of some talents. The most important point was that Earth would provide the 8 Arms race with a portion of their spaceships and train their talents. In the eyes of the 8 Arms race, they would be able to attack and defend with spaceships, and they could even use them to travel to Earth. Rinpoche could only say that they knew nothing about technology. Not to mention anything else, there would definitely be a backdoor in the control system of their spaceships. Without specific data, they wouldn't even be able to find the location of the nodes. However, what they had obtained so far was enough to satisfy the 8 Arms race. Correspondingly, the 8 Arms race would mark out an area on Moros, the mother planet of their language, allow Earth to build a city there, and provide some resources from Moros. In addition, the 8 Arms race would also send experts to attack the 4-leaf clover planet together with Earth. This was also something that Earth valued greatly. Both the 4-leaf clover planet and Moros had many resources that were extremely useful to Earth. In addition, the vitality on these 2 planets was much more abundant than on Earth, and the upper limit for cultivation was also much higher. As long as they could gain a foothold in the Horned Dragon Galaxy, Earth would be able to train a large number of powerful warriors. Earth's current target was the continent that they had previously occupied on the 4-leaf clover planet. Its area wasn't much smaller than the American continent, and China would be able to obtain 1/3 of China's land there. Rinpoche would be able to obtain 80,000 square kilometers of land, which was equivalent to half of Yu province. Nominally, this land still belonged to China, but in fact, it was equivalent to private territory. Whether it was building a city or mining resources on it, the country wouldn't interfere too much. It seemed like Rinpoche had gained a great advantage, but in fact, the gains weren't that great. After all, the distance between Earth and the Horned Dragon Galaxy was too far, and transportation was difficult. Not only would it take a lot of time, but it would also require a huge investment of funds and resources. It could be said that the desired results might not be achieved within a few decades. Moreover, Rinpoche had to pay a price for this land. However, these were all acceptable to Rinpoche. The distance between the 2 galaxies was long, and transportation was difficult, but it wasn't a big problem for Rinpoche. Now, he only needed 1.5 days to travel between the 2 worlds and could completely transport some of the aboriginals there for development. He could also use this as a backup plan. More importantly, he could also train some experts here. In Dayo, Rinpoche could make a round trip in 2 days. Each trip, Renbochin could carry more than 1,000 kilograms. If the weight wasn't too high, he could carry 10 people at a time. If they were from the Yun nation or the Jing tribe, Renbochin could even carry 20 people. In a year, Renbochin could make 180 round trips, which was equivalent to 2,000 to 3,000 people. Renbochin had already made plans to choose talented warriors. Coupled with natural reproduction, Dayo would have tens of thousands of warriors and tens of thousands of children in a few years. Moreover, the flow of time between the two sides was different. When the next war started, he might be able to harvest a batch of Cardinal Heaven or even Immortal Heaven warriors. The only limitation is power, Renbochin said to the Empress. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Power wasn't a specialty in the spiritual sense cultivation system. If I had the power of your majesty, I might really be able to create an army. The Empress thought for a while and said, according to records, there are some medicines that can increase strength. Although they are rare, they aren't non-existent. When you return, let Shiwanya pass on my decree. Every village will find medicines that can increase strength and hand them over. There will be some gains. In addition, there are many body-strengthening techniques that can increase strength. I will watch you practice them. Renbochin touched his shiny forehead. He had to practice again. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed on Earth. The Eight Arms race had a certain understanding of Earth, and the discussions between the two sides were almost over. Half of the Eight Arms race delegation would stay on Earth while the other half would return to their home planet. After all, the details of the discussion still needed the approval of the many queens of the Eight Arms race. In general, both sides had no objections. At most, they would make some changes in the details. At the same time, Earth was also busy preparing for the upcoming colonial war. At the same time, Renbochin was also making various preparations. Chapter 1233. Master, do you want a Lolita who knows how to act cute, warm the bed, and is soft and easy to push? No, I want a child. Renbochin calmly turned his head and looked behind him. Honeysuckle didn't follow him. After all, a father still cared about his reputation. The Lolita in the swimsuit turned pale with fright and immediately turned gray with a row of vertical stripes. Cut the crap and give me the combination of martial arts. Renbochin pulled a chair over and sat down. In the past half a month, he had people input most of the martial arts into the super brain 24 hours a day. The super brain analyzed the combination of martial arts that could increase one's strength the most and wouldn't conflict with each other. In fact, most of the books in the palace and the academy had already been inputted into the library, and they were still being collected over the years. This was equivalent to an update. Wild boar with no sense of aesthetics. The Lolita muttered. The Corpse and Ghost Scroll, Heaven Seal Technique, and Blood Flame Saber. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,300 kilograms. The 10 Ultimate Books, Earth-Shocking Book, and Army Breaking Fist. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,600 kilograms. The Roaring Tiger Fist, Salvation Chart, Tyrannical Viper Technique, and Snake Scorpion Poison Technique. The combination of these four martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,700 kilograms. The Lolita listed more than a dozen martial arts combinations that Renbochin could practice. It didn't take long to increase one's strength by 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms. They were all combinations of 3 to 4 martial arts. Any more and they would affect each other, and the benefits wouldn't be great. The martial arts might even conflict with each other. Many of these martial arts required precious medicinal baths, but this didn't matter to Renbochin. Renbochin took the list from the printer at the side. The names on it were all very cool. As for the actual effect, it wasn't bad. After all, the main effect of most martial arts wasn't to increase one's strength. Strength was just a side effect. For example, the corpse and ghost scroll. After practicing, one would become ghostly and inhuman. However, one's body was extremely hard and could withstand swords and knives. After reaching the spirit will level, the Heaven Seal technique could condense heaven-grade weapons and freeze people. Although one couldn't move, as long as someone cooperated, they could easily kill an expert of the same level. Rinpoche listened to the little Alita's analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of various martial arts combinations and finally chose the 10 Ultimate Books, Earth-Shocking Book, and the combination of the Army-Breaking Fist. However, this was where his advantage lay. With the support of sufficient resources, it was not difficult to cultivate the 10 Ultimate Books and the Earth-Shaking Tome. However, the last technique, the Army-Shattering Fist, required the tempering of life and death on the battlefield in order to progress quickly. This gave Rinpoche a headache. If it was just a battlefield, they could just start a war. However, if they needed to be tempered by life and death situations, then only the outsiders could do so. Fortunately, after practicing the other two martial arts, he would be able to have 1,100 pounds of strength. In the future, he would see if he could use the other martial arts to replace the regiment's shattering fist. The order to collect all kinds of natural treasures that could increase one's strength had been sent to all the villages in the 60,000 mountains. The Protectorate of the South had even sent a group of experts to search the dangerous areas. It was easy to cultivate in the government, not to mention that he was in control of a country and had the support of a country. 3 days later, Rinpoche couldn't laugh anymore. The Empress sat on a chair and watched the television dramas from the past 20 years. She held a bowl of sorghum wine in one hand and a whip in the other. One of the eyes saw that Rinpoche's movements were slightly slower, and the whip broke through the air and lashed at the side of Rinpoche's feet. The 20-centimeter thick flagstone immediately turned into powder. Soon after, he heard the sound of the air exploding. This was the sound of the whip breaking through the sound barrier. The corners of Rinpoche's eyes twitched. Practice. The Empress looked at Rinpoche with one eye and watched the television drama with the other. Rinpoche was speechless. Your Majesty, one of your eyes is on the left and the other on the right. It's as if you were hit by the 7 wounds fist. Pow! This time, the whip really hit him. When Rinpoche practiced the young boosting technique, he lost all his hair and became bald, but he was also invulnerable. However, after this whip hit him, a bloody scar immediately appeared on his body. The area around the wound was like a crack after metal had been split open. Hiss! Rinpoche recalled that run under the setting sun, the youth that had passed away, and the 8-year-old little girl from more than 20 years ago. Fortunately, no one saw it. It had to be said that the Empress's character was extremely good in some aspects. Knowing that Rinpoche would be beaten today, she didn't even leave anyone to serve him. This was more or less saving him some face. Rinpoche continued to immerse himself in his boxing practice. Every day, he would handle affairs in the morning, practice boxing in the afternoon, and nurture the statue at night. Half a month later, there was good news. 3 fruits that could increase one's strength were found in the 60,000 mountains. These rare treasures were rare, but they weren't impossible to obtain. It was just that there wasn't a need for them in the past, and no one had been sent to specifically search for them. Even if someone occasionally found them, they would keep them for themselves. Now that the state had mobilized many experts from the government and many villages in the 60,000 mountains to search together, they quickly found something. The biggest difficulty was that the 60,000 mountains were too big, and most of these rare treasures were in unexplored areas or dangerous places with many ferocious beasts. After all, those that were easy to find had already been eaten. After the 3 earth fruits were found, there was one after another good news. The materials needed to practice the 10 ultimate manuals were finally complete. As a result, the speed at which Rinpoche practiced the 10 ultimate manuals began to soar. After another half a month, the 3 earth fruits were in Rinpoche's hands. They were 3 fish-sized fruits that looked like persimmons and gave off a faint smell of rotten eggs. It was said that according to the strength and potential of the person who consumed it, each fruit could increase one's strength by 100 to 200 kilograms. The higher the strength, the less the increase. The greater the physical potential, the more the increase. The 3 fruits increased his strength by 150 kilograms, which made Rinpoche understand that he deserved to be a tall, rich, and handsome magician. As a result, the Empress asked someone to design a series of programs to nourish his body and increase its potential. After all, although many medicines wouldn't increase his strength, they could nourish the body and increase its potential. However, after eating these 3 earth fruits, Rinpoche's practice of the 10 ultimate manuals sped up a little. The earth spirit people have all left the barrier between the 2 worlds. These fellows are really a scourge. Wherever they go, there are no rats or grass left. Rinpoche clicked his tongue as he looked at the pictures that were transmitted back to him. Everything had been eaten. Fortunately, these foreign races were strong, and they had brought some special food with them. 1 grain was enough to last them for a day. If it were an ordinary army, they would starve to death on the way, not to mention being harassed by ferocious beasts. However, there are also benefits. The Protectorate of the South can advance along the route that the Earth Spirit people took. All the ferocious beasts along the way have been cleared. Inform the Protectorate of the South that they can mobilize the army and rebuild the forward operating camp at the barrier between the 2 worlds. Their food is full of vitality, which is why 1 grain can last for a day. This is something we can't do. We can only transport large amounts of supplies to the barrier by plane. However, the areas that have been cleared by the Earth Spirit people will soon be occupied by new flying beasts. Because the flying beasts have a large range of activity and have no natural enemies, they will quickly move to this area. Even if there is no food, it will become their territory. In this way, a large number of troops will be needed to clear the flying beasts near this long supply line, Rinpoche said. This was a difficult problem. To clear such a long supply line, not only would a large number of experts be needed, but they would also need more supplies, which would put more pressure on the logistics. What do you think? The Empress looked at him. Expand the army and increase taxes. Rinpoche said after some thought. After all, it took money to support an army and logistic supplies. Although there were many ways for the imperial court to earn money, the Aboriginal army ate too much. The cost of maintaining an Aboriginal army of 100,000 soldiers was equivalent to maintaining an ordinary army of at least 500,000. At present, there were more than 150,000 Aboriginal soldiers, which was equivalent to an army of 750,000. In addition, it was difficult to resupply in the 60,000 mountains, and the annual military expenditure was much higher than that of a million-strong army. One had to know that there were more than 10 million Aboriginals, and the people of the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe only had about 100 million people. With the productivity of this era, 100 million people supporting a million-strong army could be considered a militaristic act. Moreover, if they wanted to expand the army again and maintain this supply line, they would need a large number of soldiers. Upon hearing this, the Empress frowned. Rinpoche then said something else, which made her frown relax a little. However, the additional taxes can be made up by the Chin Nation, Great Xia, and the Imperial Court. It can also be called tributes. The Imperial Court was the country established by the Revolutionary Army that Su Qing was in, and it was opposite Great Xia across the river. The Empress immediately made a decision after hearing this. Whether they agreed or not wasn't important. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1234. Something big had happened in the capital of the Qin nation recently. It was a top priority for the upper echelons and aristocrats of the Qin nation. The Princess of Dao was sent to the Qin nation as an envoy. Women in this world didn't have much status. Apart from marriage, it was unheard of for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission. However, with the presence of the Empress and the fact that the Empress only had one son, even though it was strange for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission, it wasn't unacceptable. Furthermore, it wasn't a secret that the princess was one of the top experts in the world. She was born with the strength of an earth will expert. She was only 17 years old, but she was already a cardinal heaven expert, which was equivalent to a spirit will expert. She would be one of the top experts in any country and could even meet the king. Coupled with her status as a princess and the strength of Dao, it went without saying that the Qin nation attached great importance to this. The commoners probably didn't have much to do with it, and most of them didn't even care. All they thought about every day was how to fill their stomachs. Most people didn't leave a radius of 150 kilometers from birth to death, so they naturally didn't know anything about Dao. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't know anything. At least, the various utensils that Dao sold were very expensive, such as mirrors, glass, porcelain, spices, clocks, and cars. Although it was rare, cars could still be seen in the capital of the Qin nation. Nothing represented the status of the rich and the aristocrats better than these things. Unlike the ordinary people in Dao who could drive tractors everywhere, the high cost of sending caravans to buy diesel and transport it back made it difficult for anyone except the truly rich to afford it. However, it was precisely because of this that cars were more sought after. The rarer something was, the better it was. Only the rarest and most expensive cars were the best. Moreover, a trip with these things would at least attract a lot of attention. As a result, Dao, which originally gave people the impression of being barren and poor, was now synonymous with mystery and power in the eyes of many. This was especially true for the upper echelons of the Qin nation, who really understood the situation abroad. In addition to envy and awe of Dao's power, there were all kinds of indescribable feelings in their hearts. 20 years ago, Dao was indeed poor. They didn't have sharp weapons, exquisite silk, or anything beautiful. They only relied on a group of unruly people who committed murder, arson, and robbery, which made the Qin nation, the Yun nation, and Great Xia look down on them. However, with the emergence of one person, the development of Dao over the past 20 years had been advancing in a tyrannical manner. All kinds of exquisite items, all kinds of wonderful products that people couldn't stop praising, came out of the desert of that civilization. Telephones that could communicate thousands of miles away, lifelike street projections, ironclad warships on the water, and even giant steel eagles that could fly in the sky. Today, the Yun nation had perished and was turned into the Yun residence by Dao. Great Xia was split into two and could no longer take care of Dao. The state of Qin shrank in a corner, burying its head in the soil. On the surface, it was singing and dancing to celebrate peace, but behind the scenes, it was unknown how many knowledgeable people were unable to sleep. On this day, the white-haired Prime Minister of the state of Qin went 5 kilometers outside the city to welcome them. Although in the eyes of many people, this was destroying their prestige, this proposal was opposed by many people as soon as it was put forward. This was especially true for the arrogant Qin nobles who indulged in pleasure. Mu Wu shook his head and sighed inwardly as he recalled the words of those people in the hall. Some people hadn't opened their eyes to take a good look at the world for a long time. At this point, they could already see the troops coming from afar. The people of the Yun nation were at the front and back, and the Jianlong army was at the northwest to avoid colliding with them. In the middle was the group of envoys, which included 500 guards and some attendants. Although there were only 500 of them, they were the most powerful force under the Empress, the winged cavalry. Every one of them was at the earth will level. Even though there were only 500 of them, they could contend with 5,000 people or even more. No one dared to underestimate them. The troops stopped in front of them, and the Jianlong army in front of them spread out and entered the city from the sides. The middle army slowly stopped, and Mu Wu sent someone to report their identity in a very humble manner. After a while, they saw a young lady sitting on a horse, trying her best to look dignified and serious. Although Honeysuckle tried her best to look dignified and serious, her eyes were wandering and unconsciously looking at everything that she found interesting, except for the group of people in front of her and the old man. Why did I come here? What does this have to do with me? Honeysuckle couldn't help but think of this question. She had no interest in the affairs of the imperial court at all. She just loved to play. She relied on her fists to recruit sons everywhere. She recruited monks, Taoist nuns, experts with bad connections, and murderers to form a band. She was even preparing to shoot a movie. However, as soon as she brought up this idea, her father, doubtfully, kicked her to this barren country that had no sense of existence. Honeysuckle was daydreaming and simply didn't pay attention to what the old man in front of her said. She continued until someone coughed heavily behind her. What? I'm Mu Wu. Greetings, Princess of Dao. Mu Wu repeated as if nothing had happened, and then introduced the officials around him. Princess, you must have had a long journey. Why don't you follow me into the city and rest for a day? In fact, Mu Wu came to see who the main envoy was. He wanted to invite the other party into the carriage for a chat and sound out the other party's intentions. However, at this moment, the others were behind this princess. It seemed that this princess was the one in charge, so it wasn't appropriate to rashly invite her. He wasn't afraid of an old man inviting a young lady into the carriage for a chat. It seemed that it was easier to get information out of that person, but he was afraid that the 500 winged cavalry warriors would chop him up. Don't think that they couldn't do it. The barbarians of Dao were famous for not playing their cards according to common sense and for turning hostile and chopping people up at any time. More than 10 years ago, being sent to Dao as an envoy every year was almost a matter of life and death. It was only because the Empress lived in seclusion and cultivated her character that the number of envoys killed over the past 10 years didn't exceed 3. Mu Wu came out of the city to welcome the princess and the Jianlong army entered the city. Everyone naturally knew that the princess had arrived. Many people in the city waited anxiously by the roadside and got what they wished for. They saw the naive and unaffected princess of Dao sitting on the back of a horse and looking around curiously. There were also hundreds of ferocious-looking bald men who were covered in blood looking around with threatening gazes. Honeysuckle was a little disappointed along the way into the city. The capital of the Qin nation looked lackluster. In terms of extravagance, it was much worse than Wangjing. In terms of grandeur, it was far inferior to the imperial capital. However, when they arrived at the Ministry of Rites, Honeysuckle was still full of energy and wanted to go out for a stroll. However, he was stopped by someone. After all, he was on a diplomatic mission and couldn't go out and cause trouble the moment he landed. Fortunately, he could look forward to the state banquet that night. Chen Ziong from the Qin family of Jiangnan pays his respects to the Princess of Dao. Just as he arrived at the entrance of the palace, he unexpectedly met a nobleman with a powdered face who thought he was good. Honeysuckle blinked his eyes and looked at Chen Ziong, who was gorgeously dressed like a peacock spreading its tail. Oh! Bright and clear like the light clouds covering the moon, fluttering like the flowing snow in the returning wind. This poem is most suitable to describe your highness, Chen Ziong recited leisurely. He then shook his head and recited, round and round, glossy and jade-like. Full of words, breath like orchids. Gorgeous and graceful, makes me forget to eat. One had to know that the husband of the Empress wasn't a citizen of Dao and was weak and powerless. With this precedent, it was unknown how many noblemen wanted to win the princess's smile. The first to appear was naturally the strongest. Honeysuckle continued to blink his eyes and looked at the peacock in front of him while reciting the poem and hitting his palm with his fan. After pondering for a long time and being influenced by various books and movies on Earth, he finally understood one thing. This guy wants to flirt with me. Honeysuckle, who realized the other party's intention, widened his eyes. Should he follow the usual practice and beat him up or scold him before beating him up? Damn it, shameless. Many people who were watching from afar cursed in their hearts. Chin Ziong saw that Honeysuckle's expression had a reaction and was delighted. He thought to himself that this guy was indeed from the barbarian lands. Just reciting a few lines of poetry was enough to make the other party lose control. Then, everything went black. As if he was hit by a hammer, his head swung back heavily and his entire body flew out. First set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Remember, Scholar's residence. Chapter 1235. Hua had held back a little. Otherwise, this punch would have blown his head off. Even so, there was chaos in front of the palace. Chen Ziang's status in the Qin nation wasn't low. He was the first one to speak to Hua. The Qin family of Jiangnan was a big family in the Qin nation, which could be seen from their surname. Even though they weren't royalty, they had a close relationship with the royal family. The most favored son of the Qin family was punched unconscious in front of the palace. The faces of the people in front of the palace turned pale, and many of them drew their weapons. How dare you draw your weapons against me? Hua wanted to say that he was flirting with her, but when she saw the actions of the people, her expression changed. The Empress's phoenix eyes narrowed, and a cold glint flashed in her eyes. All of you stop, all of you stop. A golden-armored general rushed over and checked on Qin Ziang's condition before cupping his fists and saying to Hua, I wonder if the Qin nation did not treat the princess well, or did I offend the princess? Why is the princess so ruthless? Do I need to explain to you? Hua said unhappily. In Dayo, who dared to draw their weapons against her? How dare you ask me for an explanation now? Dayo, Earth, the princess, a student with a hidden identity, and a bunch of sons. Hua's unique experiences had also created her unique character and way of life. Even though she was naive, lively, and playful, she knew what she represented now. Her face darkened because of her power. Be it her identity or her strength, no one dared to act rashly. The veins on the golden-armored general's neck were bulging. There was nothing more sullen than this. I will report this to Her Majesty and the other officials. In fact, there was no need for him to say anything. Someone had already gone in to report. The people who were sitting and chatting in the hall immediately went into an uproar. Then, the entire hall quieted down as everyone looked at someone in the hall. Even those who didn't know what happened in the distance lowered their voices. Say it again. Why did the princess hit him? Qin Danqing, the head of the Qin family and the Minister of Revenue, was able to suppress the anger in his heart when he heard this news. His expression did not change as he asked in a deep voice. Young Master Qin recited 2 poems, both of which were words of praise. There were no other actions. The person who came said the names of the poems. Everyone was a little suspicious. These 2 poems did not disrespect the other party, so how did things turn out like this? Simply unbridled and lawless. This is the Qin nation, not Dayo. The head of the Qin clan, the Minister of Revenue, Qin Danqing, said in a deep voice, Since Ziong is innocent, then His Highness must give us an explanation for his rudeness. As she spoke, Qin Danqing took in everyone's expressions and shut her mouth. On the other hand, many of the officials who were trying to curry favor with the Qin clan looked furious, as if they had been greatly insulted. When the emperor of the state of Qin arrived, a man in his 30s with a white face and a long beard, who looked rather elegant, led 2 flowers into the palace. After a while, Erhua strode into the hall. He glanced at everyone present and cupped his fists at the head of the table. Qi Yuqing greets the emperor of the Qin nation. Take a seat, princess. Emperor Qin said. Erhua didn't have a title. Dayo only had one princess, and if nothing went wrong, she would be the next empress. Therefore, she was led to the head of the table, which was second only to the emperor and equal to the prime minister. Many people in the hall looked at Chen Danqing. He had been resting with his eyes closed and didn't say a word. After Erhua sat down, Chen Danqing started to make things difficult. Your Majesty, before the banquet starts, I have something to say. Everyone's eyes flashed. Oh, please speak. Emperor Chen's eyes flashed and he had a gentle smile on his face. Chen Danqing strode to the center of the hall, waved his sleeves, cupped his fists, and turned to Erhua. Just now, Chen Ziyang, a disciple of the Qin clan, offended the princess of Dayo and was punished lightly. I wonder if the princess can explain to me. The Qin clan doesn't discipline their disciples verbally, so I will definitely discipline them strictly when I return. Not only did he explain the matter clearly, he did not put himself in a high position. He even left a way out for himself. He said that he would go back to teach his disciple a lesson, but if Second Flower could not give a reason, it would be his turn to make things difficult for him. In terms of words, Erhua was no match for this old fox. Oh. Something like this happened? Emperor Qin didn't change his smile. He didn't wait for Erhua to speak. I wonder how Ziyang is doing. Dayo and Qin have different customs. Maybe he offended you unintentionally. Chen Danqing's face didn't change. He slightly lowered his head and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. Erhua rolled her eyes. She had read about the Qin nation before she came. The current emperor was only 12 years old when he ascended the throne. When the late emperor was seriously ill, he set up a cabinet to assist him. There were 3 scholars in the cabinet to support the young emperor. However, to prevent the cabinet from influencing the court, the late emperor held the power in the 6 ministries. Nominally, the 3 schools were higher than the 6 ministries, but in reality, the 6 ministries held most of the power. Therefore, the court of the Qin nation was very chaotic. Now that the emperor was in the prime of his life, he wanted to reclaim the throne, but he was in constant conflict with many ministers and aristocratic families. It could be seen from the current situation in the court. Although his father and Empress mother were prepared to beat up the Qin nation from top to bottom before making them listen to them obediently, now it seemed like they could support one group at a time and beat the other. There were many such situations in history books. Supporting the emperor and suppressing the nobles and ministers was the best option. After all, the emperor was the legitimate emperor and was in the same line as his family. Erhua's interest was piqued as these thoughts popped up in her mind. Well, on second thought, it could be summarized as killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The emperor was the monkey. Erhua helped him kill the chicken, so he would definitely repay her kindness. He wouldn't refuse or dare to object to her intentions. Anyway, there was no one in the Qin nation who could fight. Thinking of this, Erhua's face turned cold. She put on an arrogant posture and said, "He's your son." No wonder he was so rude. His saliva flew everywhere when he spoke, and he almost sprayed it on me. I can assume that he was deliberately humiliating me. Is this your family's plan? Nonsense. Chen Danqing's face turned green. His saliva flew everywhere when he spoke. That was dementia. If these words were to spread, Chen Ziyang's reputation would be tarnished. Are you saying that I'm babbling nonsense? Erhua frowned and pressed one hand under the table. He wondered if he should flip the table to show his anger. After pondering for a second, the table flew out. Duong. If Enchanting wasn't good at martial arts, the table would have hit his face. How dare you! Everyone heard Hua's sweet voice before the guards in the main hall shouted. However, they didn't have time to admire how soft and delicate her voice was. Their faces twitched. She flipped the table with just 2 sentences. She was indeed the princess of Dao. How dare you be so rude in the palace of the Qin nation? Enchanting was so angry that his beard curled up. How dare you say that the princess of Dao is babbling nonsense? Hua was even angrier than Enchanting. I didn't, then you are babbling nonsense with the intention of framing me. Nonsense, you still want to say that the princess of Dao is babbling nonsense. No matter what, Enchanting was a scholar. He had never been in such a bad fight. Everyone looked at Enchanting, who went from an old fox to a woman's quarreling mode in the blink of an eye. Enchanting's face was covered in dirt and her face was red from honeysuckle's rich experience. They were at a loss. Although the current behavior of Princess Wuyang was not in line with their understanding of princesses and envoys. But the current scene was very familiar and intimate. It was in line with their understanding of women. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1236. Enchanting almost vomited blood and died from Hua's tiger-like, "You're cold, heartless, and unreasonable." He never thought that he would be in such a situation. He never thought that a princess would actually quarrel with someone. Furthermore, it was during a banquet for her when she was on a diplomatic mission to another country. He felt that his head was going to explode. However, he finally understood one thing. No matter what, he had lost. What would happen if he quarreled with a teenage girl? He didn't know about Hua's experience. Hua had been beating people up since he was young. He had beaten up more people than Enchanting knew. Many of them were stubborn and cursed at the same time. Although Hua used his fists more than his mouth, if he really wanted to curse, he could write a cursing dictionary. If not for the fact that he had been beaten up by the Empress and Renbachin for cursing, she would have made this old man doubt his life. Although Enchanting didn't know about this, he also had the intention to retreat. No matter what the other party's identity was, it couldn't change the fact that she was a teenage girl. Not only was she of high status, but she was also very good at fighting. Finally, he threw out a sentence and was about to leave. He didn't even give face to the Empress. However, how could Hua let him leave just like that? Before he could take 3 steps, he appeared behind him like the wind and kicked his waist. Everyone could hear the sound of bones breaking. Enchanting didn't even have time to groan before he was sent flying. Standing there with his right leg in a kicking position, Hua was deep in thought. Should he let him call me daddy? It didn't seem complete if he didn't say it after beating someone up. Fortunately, Hua didn't have obsessive-compulsive disorder and eventually gave up on this idea. However, the hall was in an uproar. Even those who didn't like Enchanting didn't look too good at this moment. Quarreling in the hall and beating up an important official of the country was simply unimaginable and unreasonable. The officials of the Qin nation were most surprised by Princess Wuyang's temperament. She didn't seem like a princess at all. However, no princess was like Hua, who was mischievous and got beaten up every day. Coupled with a mother like the Empress, Hua's character was very unique. She was domineering, tough, flamboyant, and unscrupulous in a way that ordinary girls didn't have. Honeysuckle looked around as if she was looking at a bunch of country bumpkins when she heard the commotion around her. She had a faint smile on her face. In her heart, they were indeed a bunch of country bumpkins. That was why they were in such a mess. If you were in Dao's imperial court, you bunch of weaklings wouldn't even survive the first day. What was the big deal about beating up an important minister? In Dayo's imperial court, people's brains were beaten into a pulp every day. There was even a row of bricks placed under the Empress's chair. What's going on? The only problem was, they were in the Qin Kingdom's royal palace, and the ones they were fighting were the officials of the Qin Kingdom. But it didn't matter. Are you going to bite me? I'm not here to make friends. I don't need you to like me. I just need you to respect me and be afraid of me. As for these two, they could be obtained with one's fists. On the other hand, Emperor Qin looked at the chaotic hall below expressionlessly. He memorized everyone's expressions, but no one knew what he was thinking. Silence. After a few minutes, someone stood up and spoke, suppressing the chaotic situation. Princess Wuyang. Mu Wu was interrupted by Emperor Qin. The customs of Dayo and the Qin nation are different. There are some misunderstandings on both sides. Princess Wuyang may have been impulsive, and Sir Chen's words and actions are somewhat inappropriate. It's inappropriate for him to leave early. We'll talk about this later. My dear officials, please take your seats. Someone escorted Sir Chen back to his residence and summoned the imperial physician to accompany him. All the herbs will be taken from the palace treasury. Princess Wuyang, please take a seat and join us. Chen Danqing was carried away. The palace banquet seemed to be uneventful on the surface, but everyone was silent and had their own thoughts. Your Majesty, isn't this inappropriate? If we rely on the power of others, I'm afraid we'll be inviting a wolf into the house. After the palace banquet, somewhere in the palace, Mu Wu was slightly hesitant. What's inappropriate? Just give them what they want. I'm just afraid they won't want it. With Dayo's current strength and the Qin nation's current situation, if Dayo sends troops to invade, will we be able to stop them? Not to mention the others, just the Empress alone was enough to stop her. Dayo's mind isn't necessarily on expanding its territory. You've heard of that rumor, right? All these years, Dayo's resources have been sent to the depths of the 60,000 mountains. It's said that there are some foreign races there, and the top experts who disappeared are fighting with them. This is only a rumor, and we don't know whether it's true or not. Now that the power in the imperial court has fallen, how many people listen to me, the emperor? How many of my edicts can be disseminated? Is the Qin nation still under the control of the imperial court? Since that's the case, it's better to rely on external forces to regain power. After that, I'll be able to issue political orders, clean up the aristocratic families, and fill the national treasury. As long as they give me what I want, I'll give them what they want. If that's the case, I'm afraid those aristocratic families will be forced into a corner and might rebel. Although Princess Wuyang is strong, she only has 500 servants. Even if she's willing, she might not be able to protect you. Isn't that simple? Cut off one of their arms first. Coincidentally, Qin Danqing has a conflict with Qi Yuqing. As long as we can destroy the Qin family, we'll cut off one of their arms. Aren't there a few good-for-nothings in the Qin family? After Qin Danqing is injured by Qi Yuqing, we can find someone to provoke them. Those good-for-nothings are used to being domineering, and they will recklessly run over to provoke her. In that case, I'll hand my sword over to her. As long as she takes this opportunity to destroy the Qin family in a thunderous manner, the other families will definitely be frightened and won't dare to act rashly. In this way, we can take back the 5,000 soldiers of the left guard. With the left guard restraining the right guard, they won't have a chance to do anything. This old subject understands. Go and see Princess Wuyang directly. As long as she agrees, I'll agree to all her conditions, even if the Qin nation becomes a vassal state of Dayo. Soon after Hua returned to his residence, someone came to visit him. It was Mu Wu, the first minister. After hearing the other party's intentions, Hua actually hit it off with him. He felt that it wasn't easy for him to use his brain, lest his father always said that his brain was full of muscles. However, the result was no different from not using his brain at all. Even if he didn't do anything, the other party would still find him. The only thing he gained was that he already had a target. Hua didn't use her brain much. Most of the time, she just needed to extend her hand, and people would call her father. Although she was already in high school, this was mainly because she spent twice the time studying and had the skills of a Cardinal Heaven expert. In fact, the former wasn't that important. The latter was the main reason why she could successfully enter high school. After sending Mu Wu off, Hua thought about it and didn't look for anyone to discuss with. There was no one in the team who was smarter than him. As for calling her father, it wasn't necessary. The small Chen nation wouldn't be able to cause any trouble no matter what. The next morning, when she was sitting at her table eating breakfast, she heard people shouting and cursing at the door. They wanted to rush in. However, when she rushed to the door to have some fun, she realized that it was already over. More than 10 people were lying in disorder at the door. All of their bones were broken, and they were only left with one breath. Who are they? Hua raised her chin. Among them, there were 2 people who looked like young masters from their clothes. Their faces were smeared with blood that they had vomited. I don't know. The 2 winged cavalry warriors who were guarding the door had simple and honest smiles on their faces. Who cared? In any case, they just had to fight. Go and ask. Chapter 1237. The Chin Family. Honeysuckle crossed her arms. They beat up the old one last night, and now someone dared to come looking for trouble. Who gave them the courage? Honeysuckle felt like laughing. If they had stayed at home, she would have had to find an excuse to cause trouble. There was no need to find an excuse. Honeysuckle immediately shouted into the room, "Someone is here. Someone is fighting their way to the door." Her voice was filled with eagerness. As soon as she shouted, there was a commotion in the yard. Hundreds of figures rushed out. Where? Where? They couldn't hide the smile on their faces. It was as if they were waiting for a delivery on 11 and were ready to open it. Or perhaps they were so hungry that they couldn't help but stare at their own fingers. Finally, their own takeout arrived. Come with 100 people. Bring them and follow me. Remember to handle them with care. They are fragile now. Honeysuckle pointed at the dozens of people outside. Look, this quantifier can describe their current state very well. The people behind Honeysuckle looked at each other and started an intense game of rock, paper, scissors with tacit understanding. Rock, scissors, paper. One of them punched him, while the other slapped him against the wall. I'm paper, you're rock. I win. That person laughed proudly. It was a spectacular sight to see hundreds of people playing rock, paper, scissors. Their movements were a bit big. Some of the guys' eyes were red from being stabbed by the scissors. Those who poked at others were idiots. After all, most people preferred to give out stones. Paper was the most suitable. Not only could they win, they could also slap people. Hurry up. Honeysuckle leaned against the door and couldn't help but urge them. She was afraid that the Chin family would come over and kneel in front of her. Honeysuckle was a little girl. She could be persuaded but not cowed. She was also thin-skinned. If the other party really kneeled, she would be too embarrassed to do anything. Fortunately, the thing she was most worried about didn't happen. These guys seemed to have snuck over on their own. They lay at the door and didn't show up until now. This place was next to the Ministry of Rights. There wasn't even a commoner around. Such a big thing happened, but no one from the Ministry of Rights showed up. It was as if they didn't know. Your Majesty, Princess Wuyang has set off. Emperor Chen's ears twitched as he was writing. This news had relieved him of a lot of pressure recently. If everything went smoothly, he would soon be able to take back his power and become the true emperor. However, he quickly calmed down from the excitement in his heart. Even though the handwriting had been dyed with ink, he still finished writing the rest of it. Only then did he crumple the handwriting into a ball and throw it into the pile of waste paper. Emperor Chen turned around and sighed. A few good-for-nothings even dared to offend the Princess of Dayo. From this, we can see how bold the Qin family is. The Qin family of Jiangnan has been in the limelight for too long. It's not just those good-for-nothings. Isn't Lord Qin Danqing the same? That Qin Ziong is his son. It was Qin Danqing's idea to get close to Princess Marshal Yang. He really doesn't know how to spell the word death for having thoughts about Princess Marshal Yang. Mu Wu said. With the Qin family's great reputation, Erhuan knew the way just by grabbing a random person on the street. Before the two guards could speak, their faces were pressed into the stone slabs. Even if they survived, they probably wouldn't have the face to see anyone for the rest of their lives. Honeysuckle kicked open the door and led the others in. Everyone inside, get out now. That Qi Yuqing is too domineering. She's going too far. Ancestor, we can't let this matter go. In a hall of the Qin family, a few people were talking. In the seat of honor was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He was the Qin family's biggest reliance. The status of the Qin family wasn't just because they had produced 7 or 8 empresses over the past few hundred years or because they had produced 10 rank 3 officials. It was also because they had always had a spirit will expert in charge. Even in Great Xia, a family that had a spirit will expert in charge for hundreds of years was enough to become the top family, not to mention the Qin state which was located in a remote corner. When Qin Danqing was carried back last night, the Qin family immediately exploded. Although it was not difficult to deal with injuries such as a fractured lumbar spine and shattered pelvis in this world, the family head had almost been crippled. How could the Qin family, which had been one of the most powerful families in the Qin country for hundreds of years, swallow this insult? However, Dayo rose to prominence 20 years ago. Today, it was powerful and had many experts. The group of people quarreled for half a night without any results. Today, the ancestor appeared, but he didn't say a word and let the people below him quarrel. At this moment, everyone heard the clear voice of a young girl coming from outside. Everyone inside, get out now. The ancestor of the Qin family, Qin Deng, frowned, got up, and walked out. Let's go out and take a look. After passing through the courtyard, he saw a lot of people lying on the ground. Most of them were twisted in strange positions. It looked like there weren't many bones in their bodies that were intact. If it weren't for the slight rise and fall of their chests, they would look more like corpses. In the middle of the courtyard stood a young girl who was about 16 or 17 years old. She was dressed in a blue dress, had a delicate face, and had a cold expression on her face. In addition, there were hundreds of bear-like burly men with a strong smell of blood on their bodies. She could tell the origin of these people at a glance. Princess Wuyang, some people behind Qin Deng exclaimed. Princess Wuyang, what's the meaning of this? Qin Deng ignored the others and asked in a deep voice with a gloomy face. A few good-for-nothings actually dared to find trouble with me. Hua said coldly. She tilted her head and asked, what did they do just now? She really didn't know. Those two guys were a little disrespectful to Her Highness. They ran to the door and said. Get that slut Qi Yuqing out, a winged cavalry warrior said as he pointed at the two people on the ground. Honeysuckle widened his eyes and kicked the burly bearman out of the door. She had a look of disbelief on her face and said, they actually dared to scold me. They are actually still alive. As soon as Hua finished speaking, a group of black figures instantly dashed out and smashed heavily on the ground. 5 or 6 people stepped on the 2 human figures on the ground at the same time. Immediately, the human figures disappeared and became meat paste. "Stop! Xiao Wu, Xiao Qi," someone behind Chen Deng shouted. Chen Deng's face turned ugly, and his heart turned even colder. "How dare the Qin family!" Honeysuckle sneered. "Princess Wuyang, we still don't know the truth of what happened just now. You killed a direct descendant of the Qin family just because of a sentence from someone else. Yesterday, you even injured the head of the Qin family and Qin Ziong. This is simply intolerable. This is the Qin nation, not Dayo. Aren't you afraid of a war between the 2 nations? The Qin family will definitely report this matter to the higher-ups and definitely won't let this matter go," someone behind Chen Deng shouted. Hua looked at the group of people opposite her. Most of them actually agreed with what she said, which made her feel like laughing. "Ha!" Hua shook her head slightly and said, "You are the frogs at the bottom of the well. You are used to being domineering in the Qin nation. Do you really think that everyone will follow your rules? I thought that the 2 nouveau riches from the Qin family were stupid enough to come and scold me. I didn't expect you guys to be equally stupid. You are just a bunch of useless people. Do you really think that I will reason with you guys honestly? When I was young, my father told me that the one with the bigger fist is the reason. Only when both parties are equal will there be reason. Will you reason with people when you bully the commoners and confiscate the businesses of the merchants? What gives you the illusion that you are qualified to reason with me? The Qin family. What a joke." Hua looked at the crowd coldly, waved her hand, and said in a clear and soft voice, "Kill them all." The Qin nation had been peaceful for 20 years because Renbaqian found it tiring and troublesome and didn't want to expand his territory. There were only a few spirit will experts, and if he wanted to, he could kill them with a flip of his palm. If the Qin nation was like this, it was needless to mention a family from the Qin nation. Moreover, this was a request from the Qin emperor. Even in death, the Qin family couldn't believe that the princess of Dayo actually found an excuse and dared to kill her way into the residence of a rank 3 official in the Qin nation. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 1238. When a princess of a country went on a diplomatic mission from another country, she slaughtered the entire clan of that country. Who had ever heard of such a thing? The entire Qin nation was in an uproar. Many rich and powerful nobles were red-eyed. This wasn't going too far. This was simply treating them like livestock raised by their own family. Just as everyone was shocked by this news and wondering what to do next, the reaction of the Qin nation's imperial family poured a bucket of cold water over everyone's heads. After the extermination of the Qin family, the imperial family immediately sent people to arrest Zhuo Wei and severely listed the crimes of the Qin family. This made everyone immediately understand one thing. The imperial family and Dayo's Princess Wuyang were in cahoots. The emperor, who had been arrested, was no longer willing to lose his power. He would rather invite a wolf into his house and bite off a piece of meat from the aristocratic families. Renbaqian was very clear about what happened in the Qin nation. He didn't really care, even though it sounded quite exaggerated. A princess exterminating the aristocratic families in the Qin nation. In fact, Dayo wasn't on the same level as the Qin nation. When the Empress was in cardinal heaven, it would be troublesome if she was surrounded by an army. But now, the Empress alone could flatten the capital of the Qin nation. A few longevity heaven experts could pacify a nation. This was a gap brought about by pure strength. With such a huge gap in strength, it didn't matter what Hua did. This time, Hua was sent on a diplomatic mission to let her see more people and things and train herself. Renbaqian didn't know what she would gain. In any case, it was now a matter of using fists to solve problems. Hua was very similar to the Empress in this aspect. She always liked to use force to solve problems and was used to using force no matter what. If it was in a peaceful environment, it wouldn't be suitable. But now, the problems that the human race faced had to be solved with force. Other than force, it was one's own business. He wasn't worried about Hua's safety. In fact, there was another expert in that team, Zhu Pu Hua, who was an expert from Longevity Heaven. Although she was also very violent, she didn't like to stir up trouble as much as the others. He strolled back to the main hall. While he was still outside, he heard banging sounds on the table. The Empress was sitting on a chair and reading memorials. She was going crazy. Ren Baqin wasn't surprised. He knew what kind of people those officials were. He had been tortured by them for more than 10 years. Ren Baqin walked to the side of the table and picked up a memorial that the Empress had slapped aside. He looked at the words written on it. Your Majesty, turtle-backed bamboo, a specialty of Yonglai. It's very delicious, soft and sweet. There was also a comment from the Empress at the bottom, don't send any more turtle-backed bamboos. Lu Jing again. With one look, Ren Baqin knew who it was. Before the Empress came back, this guy spent half of the year promoting the specialty of their country, the turtle-backed bamboo. The first time he saw it, it was a novelty. After all, the bamboo shoots looked quite strange. 3 days later, he once again received a memorial, Your Highness, enclosed with this letter is the local specialty of turtle-backed bamboo. It's very delicious. He replied, I don't really like it. You don't have to send it to me next time. In the end, when the other party submitted another memorial, it said, Your Highness, I have brought you the turtle-backed bamboo. It's very delicious. King told you not to give me this, didn't I? After being scolded by Ren Baqin, now that the Empress was back, he was recommending turtle-backed bamboo again. This definitely wasn't the first time the Empress had received a letter. It seemed like the Empress was annoyed by him. The Empress held a stack of memorials in her hands for 3 minutes before throwing it to Ren Baqin impatiently. The 8,000 words in this letter were all nonsense. The only valuable thing was the last sentence, Is Your Majesty well? Ren Baqin was very experienced. After reading the first sentence, he skipped the middle and looked at the last sentence. He casually wrote, Very well. Recently, I have gained weight by 1 kilogram. Then, the third letter said, It rained heavily in Dongning today. The rain was very heavy, but the temperature was very comfortable. I was also very happy to bathe in the rain. Ren Baqin had a deep impression of the owner of this memorial. Half of his memorials this year were about the rain and the other half were about the scorching sun. The Empress's comment was, It's the rainy season now. It rains every day. I know. Then, the fourth letter said, Recently, it has been raining every day. The fish in the pond are almost drowning. Which one is better to cook or roast? Which one does Your Majesty prefer? The Empress said, I don't like any of them. The fifth letter said, Lu Jian has rebelled and declared himself the emperor. He has more than a dozen soldiers and ministers under him. This happened last year, and I have already killed them all. I suddenly remembered that I haven't informed Your Majesty yet when I was brushing my teeth today. The Empress asked, Who is Lu Jian? What else have you not told me? The sixth letter said, The rain is so heavy, Your Majesty. It's as heavy as the day I left the capital. Can I go back? The Empress said, You will stay there for the rest of your life. After casually going through a memorial, the Empress screamed, Aw. She pushed the memorials aside, got up, and stuffed Ren Baqin into a chair. Come over, my stomach hurts. Ren Baqin smiled helplessly. Going through memorials every day was indeed very frustrating, especially those that were retarded. After sitting in this position for a long time, he would encounter all kinds of weird memorials. In particular, there were a few foreign officials who were already on Renbachian's list. If there wasn't any major event like the sky falling down, their memorials would never reach Renbachian. This was also why the Empress had been working very hard in the palace recently and had to go through all the memorials every day. However, it seemed like the Empress's patience had reached its limit. Renbachian saw that the Empress hadn't left and was lying on another recliner. Renbachian looked through the memorials and conveniently mentioned the Qin nation's matter. "Oh," the Empress responded, indicating that she understood. For the people of the Qin nation, this was a huge matter, but for the Empress, it was no different from those retarded memorials just now. She completely ignored it. She then turned on the smart device on her wrist and projected a TV series. Within a few minutes, Renbachian started to get upset. Looking at the memorials that were still half a meter tall, Renbachian said helplessly, "Your Majesty, can you not cause trouble even if you don't want to work?" In order to distinguish them from other letters, the memorials were specially made. They had hard covers on both sides and were folded in the middle. There were at least 40 to 50 memorials that were half a meter tall. The Empress rolled her eyes at Renbachian and swayed her body as she went out to find a garden to bask in the sun. The annihilation of the Qin family by Duo Hua was only the beginning, not the end. The Emperor of Qin took a swift and decisive stance. After being suppressed for a long time, he finally seized the opportunity to slash at the aristocratic families and decisively reclaim power. This process naturally wasn't smooth sailing. No matter when, it was inevitable that there would be idiots who would risk their lives for power and wealth. There were even 2 internal rebellions in the Qin nation. Of course, according to what Renbachian knew, there was a lot of inside information about these 2 rebellions. Some of the people who rebelled died regardless of whether they rebelled or not. During this process, 2 of the so-called 7 top aristocratic families in the Qin nation disappeared in the annals of history besides the Qin family. In fact, these 2 families were even more miserable than the Qin family. Only a portion of the Qin family was annihilated. If the rest were obedient, the Emperor of Qin would spare their lives. However, these 2 families were involved in the rebellions, and their entire families were slaughtered. In addition, more than a dozen families, big and small, were completely annihilated. The heads that were strewn all over the ground and the smell of blood that filled the city finally calmed some people down from the brink of madness. On the surface, it seemed that the Emperor of Qin nation had gotten what he wanted and finally suppressed those aristocratic families. The Qin nation also expressed its allegiance to Dao and paid a large tribute every year. However, those aristocratic families were suppressed. Even if they paid a tribute every year, the situation in the Qin nation wouldn't be any worse than before. Just the property confiscated from those exterminated families was enough to support them for more than 10 years. Duo Hua left the Qin nation and headed all the way north to Hoyan and Great Xia. However, the turmoil in the Qin nation still hadn't stopped. It was estimated that it wouldn't stop for a few years. As for the memorials, they actually referred to some memorials from the Kangxi Emperor's era. There were only things that couldn't be imagined, but there was nothing that couldn't be done. In ancient times, there were many memorials from various officials that drove the emperor crazy. First, set a small goal, for example, 1 second. Chapter 1239. Human Emperor. Human Emperor. A man in the hall raised his voice and couldn't hide his surprise. Following this voice, the hall became like a wet market and became chaotic. Silence. Su Qing, who was over 40 years old, had a beard, a golden crown, and a golden robe embroidered with a fierce lion-like beast. He looked calm and dignified, if one forgot his surprised expression just now. "Do you have any objections to honoring my Empress as the human emperor?" Lu Hua looked calm and curiously at Su Qing, the emperor of Dao. After all, he led a group of people to split the originally powerful Great Xia into two. No matter how one looked at it, he could be considered a legend. Princess Wuyang, you'd better be more respectful. A few bearded generals glared at Lu Hua. Lu Hua sneered, ignored the officials, and just looked at Su Qing. He slowly continued, honoring Dao's Empress as the human emperor and Dao as the nation of Dao is what you should do. Unless you don't know your own strength and want to challenge the majesty of Dao. Of course, this was all nonsense. Lu Hua knew the whole story best. It didn't matter. In fact, it was just a reason for them to pay tribute every year. Following Lu Hua's words, the originally aggressive crowd suddenly became like ducks being strangled by the neck, and all their voices were strangled. Su Qing gave Lu Hua a strange look. He wasn't like those idiots from the Qin nation. Moreover, he had met Ren Baqian and Qi Zixiao when he was young and had some understanding of them. Moreover, as far as he knew, the center of gravity of these two people was now in the south. After the martial arts competition that year, the existence of foreign races was no longer a secret to some people. Not to mention, the disappearance of so many spirit-will experts in Great Xia was equivalent to the disappearance of all the super-rich people on Earth. It was very difficult to pretend that they didn't know. Therefore, after the surprise, he immediately felt that there was something wrong. Su Qing chuckled and said with some reminiscence, back then, the crops of Dao saved the lives of many people. Since our uprising, there have been high-yield crops like sweet potatoes and potatoes. Although there was chaos in the past few years, not many people starved to death. Everyone in Dao is very grateful to you. No matter what, you've saved countless people. What's more, your technology is developing very quickly, and you're starting to make this world completely different from the past few thousand years. You're walking ahead of everyone else. Dao is currently the most powerful nation in the world, and Qi Zixiao is the most powerful emperor. Furthermore, both of you are doing great things that are worthy of respect. All the countries will respect Qi Zixiao as the human emperor. I agree. Su Qing's words were beautiful. Now that Huado was here, he had already spoken his mind. If Hou Yan dared to reject him, then he could only wait for the battle to begin. Moreover, it was a battle where a bunch of experts descended. It was the kind of battle where adults fought against children. He was well aware of the difference in strength between the two of them. There was no way he could refuse. However, if someone forced Qi Zixiao to be the human emperor, then he would lose a lot of face. His dignity as the emperor of Hou Yan would also be swept to the ground. The common people would look down on him, and the people in the imperial court would inevitably be resentful. However, when this matter came out of Su Qing's mouth, it first became gratitude for Dao's high-yield food that had saved countless people. Then, he praised Dao's technology for changing the world. Dao was now the most powerful nation, and Qi Zixiao was a top expert. He then pointed out the matter that many people vaguely knew, that Dao was currently fighting against the foreign races in the south. At this point, there were fewer objections when he mentioned the common respect for the human emperor. In fact, everyone knew that they didn't have a chance to object. They just needed an excuse. At least they could save their face. Su Qing's words saved everyone's face. Even if outsiders found out, Su Qing would have something to say in the future. Most importantly, Su Qing agreed readily, which made Huado feel that he was a good person. At least, he was smart and decisive. Huado saw that everyone looked conflicted, but there was no objection. Then, he said, since we respect the nation, you guys don't have any objections to paying tribute every year, right? 1 billion silver notes every year. This was the main topic. Su Qing's face froze. Silver notes were Dao's currency. 1 billion silver notes was equivalent to 100 million taels of silver. In the past, Great Xia's annual treasury income was only slightly more than 100 million taels of silver. Even the once prosperous Yun nation's treasury income was only 7,000 to 8,000 taels of silver. Of course, since your nation pays tribute every year, Dayo will also show its appreciation and provide you with some technology and equipment, Huado added. As soon as he said this, everyone's expression changed back to normal. The expressions of all the officials in the imperial court changed back and forth like a lantern. However, everyone felt much more at ease. Dayo had too many technologies that people coveted. If they could provide them with some support, even if they didn't raise taxes, they could use these technologies to set up factories just like Dayo and earn back the money. After hearing this, Su Qing agreed in his heart. He wanted to see what kind of technology could be provided. However, Su Qing felt a little strange and asked, "Is Dayo short of money now?" Over the past decade, Dayo's products have been sold all over the world. From the lowest grade canned food and vermicelli to all kinds of spices, glass, mirrors, cotton products, and some advanced clocks and watches, there were also phones and vehicles. The annual profits from these things could be said to be massive. Furthermore, Dayo's military strength ensured that Dayo's products could enter any country and receive the lowest taxes. Under such circumstances, how could Dayo be short of money? However, the annual tribute of 1 billion taels of silver showed that Dayo was indeed short of money. Otherwise, they wouldn't have resorted to such means. After hearing Huado's words, Su Qing understood that the real highlight was the 1 billion taels of silver. He had studied Renbaqian and Qi Zixiao for many years. If the two of them really loved fame and were really that ambitious, the Qin nation wouldn't still exist. It wasn't impossible for them to swallow Hou Yan and Great Xia together. Wasn't swallowing all the other countries and becoming the greatest emperor in history better than revering the human emperor? Dayo had the strength to do so because there were too many experts in Dayo. Putting himself in Huado's shoes, he definitely wouldn't be able to resist this temptation. However, the other party hadn't made any moves for so many years. Suddenly, they proposed to revere the human emperor and asked all the countries to pay tribute every year. The meaning behind this was clear. It was for money. Could it be that the war with the foreign races is too intense? Su Qing guessed. Huado rolled her eyes. She didn't know what Su Qing was thinking. Even if she knew, she wouldn't be bothered to refute. It had nothing to do with the intensity of the war. The main reason was that the investment was too large. Dayo's army was indeed tyrannical, but it wasn't easy to maintain such a strong army. Furthermore, there were all kinds of studies. More importantly, the investment in infrastructure over the years was the real bulk of the money. In recent years, the infrastructure outside had begun to slow down. However, in a place that others couldn't see, the 60,000 mountains, was the real money-hungry place. To lay a kilometer of railroad tracks in the 60,000 mountains, the cost was more than 10 times that of the outside world. It was a black hole that could only be entered and not exited. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.